and are here to answer any questions as we go along. So I have the packet that I just sent the link, so you should be receiving that shortly. This is kind of our base that we use for our trainings. We don't use slides because I do not love to have death by PowerPoint. So I'm much more interested in what you want to know, and we can build an agenda based on that. So does anybody have any topics that they definitely want to cover?
I thought this was just about open meetings.
Okay. Is there anything specific about open meetings that you'd like to see?
Not specifically, but I think the Montana Constitution, we've had pushback on how we conduct ourselves.
Okay.
And I think I'm not really sure what we're supposed to be hearing today, but I thought we were supposed to be getting more information on how we operate as commissioners and in conjunction with the open meetings law.
Okay. Perfect. We can definitely start there. Commissioner Wargo, is there anything specific you want to talk about?
I mean, not specific. I'm pretty new to this, so I mean, I guess conversation might spark some specific questions along the way, but I guess treating me like I'm ignorant is probably a fair assumption.
Oh, all right. Well, I will kick us off. Please, please, please interrupt and ask questions and comments and experiences. I do not want to talk at a screen the whole time. That is not how I like to roll. So we'll start with kind of our general overview, and then we'll just go from there. So if you have this, I'm going to start on page 1. And at the local government center, we like to only highlight things that are super important in our opinion. So you will see like basically everything's highlighted all the time. We will start at the top, and Commissioner Brooke, I'm really glad that you referenced the Constitution because that's where we like to start too. In Montana, we have a unique constitution in several aspects, but one of them is that we have enshrined one of the most strict set of sunshine laws in the country in our state constitution. So it's not a state code, it's in our constitution. That's kind of a big deal. The story that I tell myself is that when the 1972 Constitutional Convention happened in Helena, and it's actually the third try of a constitution that we had for our state, the delegates that came to Helena were coming with kind of in the forefront of their mind, the experience that they had had over the last 80 years of essentially the Anaconda Company making decisions in Butte and Anaconda and then sending people to Helena to vote. And it wasn't necessarily inconsistent with the structure at the time. So I think as a response to that, we have these enshrined rights that are very clearly giving authority and power to the citizens and not the structures in place. So what you'll find in our state Bill of Rights, we have the federal Bill of Rights, and we have a whole separate Bill of Rights in our state constitution. And in there, we are most interested in rights numbers 8, 9, and 10. So that's the right to participate, the right to know, and the right to individual privacy. Those are the 3 that most often intersect and govern the work that you do as a public board. And so I was just talking through, and Eric was giving me great context and explanation about how the board is an entity and the department is a separate entity, and the department makes recommendations, but ultimately the board makes the decisions, and then the department executes the decisions made by the board. Does that sound consistent with what you both know? Okay, awesome. All right, so let's talk right to know and right to participate. I like to just read these because it helps me ground in it. So the public has the right to expect governmental agencies, you all, to afford such reasonable opportunity for citizen participation in the operation of the agency prior to final decision as may be provided by law. And that as may be provided by law is an important and unique addition to that right. So what it's saying is the public has a constitutional right to participate in a meaningful way prior to any decisions being made that are of significant public interest in the legislative function generally. And what I mean by that is it's when a body like a commission is making a decision. Once that decision, let's say it's a policy, is decided, then it's executed by their executive counterpart, in this case, the department. And those same requirements for access don't necessarily apply in the same way, although the public does still have rights under the right to know to see documents and all kinds of stuff. But I think the important distinction is the public has a right to participate prior to action when you're creating policy, not necessarily to the same degree when you're executing policy. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So they have a right to participate. That looks like public comment. Public comment can be written or it can be vocal. I like to remind people that they have both options, especially if you have to limit public comment for any reason. We'll talk more about that later, but they have the right to do that. Now, they also right to know, no person shall be deprived of the right to examine documents. So that's where you can get FOIA requests for emails or the notes that you take on your agenda at the meeting. Those are technically documents. So everything that is written down in any form in your role or capacity as a commissioner is technically something that should be reviewed for retention. They also have the right to observe deliberations. So not only do they have the right to participate, but they have the right to observe the entire deliberation of that public entity, except in a few special cases, which we'll talk about in a little bit, when you can close a meeting. And this is where that right prohibits public bodies from doing many things that, say, a nonprofit could do, like voting over email or having conversations via text, that kind of thing. That's all areas of major risk for your public bodies. Okay. All right. And then finally, the right to know. We have an individual right to privacy in Montana that is essential to the well-being of a free society. The reason that that is important is because that is the right to privacy is the reason that you can close a meeting. One of the two legal reasons that you cannot follow open meeting laws and allow the public to observe, which we'll talk about in detail. So those are the three things that we're continually going to fall back to. The number 8, the right to participate, number 9, the right to know, and the number 10, the right to privacy. If you jump down to the middle of that page to 2-3-103, this is, in my opinion, maybe the most important statute when you're talking about local government and public meetings and open meetings. 2-3-103 is the bridge that takes you from constitutional right to practical action. If you can understand the intent and purpose for 103, everything else is just the details about how you do it. So we'll take a look at it. So it says each agency shall develop procedures for permitting and encouraging the public to participate in agency decisions that are of significant public interest. When, as you all know, when statutes are codified, they are not always the most clear-cut black and white things on the planet, right? So there's always room for interpretation. And this was a perfect example of that. There's a couple things in there that are really, really not clear. Well, let's take both the first and second sentence together. So the procedures must ensure adequate notice to assist public participation before a final agency action is taken that is of significant interest to the public. So the two things that were really unclear that people started fighting about was what is adequate notice and what is significant interest to the public. Because what that's saying is if it's not significant interest to the public, then you don't necessarily need to notice it. You can have a whole conversation about it and not be in a public meeting and not violate open meeting laws. So what's the threshold? And there was enough argument about this that Mazurek, when he was the AG, issued an opinion on it and said, well, let's look at it and see what it actually means. So he said, first question, what is adequate notice? He said, adequate notice for a public meeting is at least 48 hours prior to the meeting, and that amount of time should increase with the significance of the topic being considered. So that's where we get that 48-hour minimum. You have to have everything posted at least 48 hours prior to the meeting, and that time could increase depending on the significance of the topic. You will not find that in statute. It is only an AG opinion, but AG opinions and case law both hold the weight of law until the legislative branch, i.e. the legislature, decides to make a new law that supersedes it. So that 48 hours acts as the law of the land in the state until the legislature does something different. Questions or thoughts?
I do. So if you have something on your agenda that you've noticed, and it's like, does say we're season setting for elk. And in the context of that, a new amendment comes up at the meeting that has not been 48-hour notice, but on the fly, a commissioner decides to make a change. How does that fit into this?
It's a great question. So this is one of those several gray areas. What I would say is look at your main motion topic. Does the amendment substantially change the intent of that main motion? If it doesn't, then it would still fall under that same notice, so you're good. If the motion was, for some reason, you're talking about setting the season for elk, and they say, well, I want to amend this motion to be setting the season for waterfowl, then you've got a problem, right? But as long as it's staying generally inside of that main topic of setting the season for elk, I think that would still apply. You would be hard pressed to find a judge that would argue that you were not clear that you were talking about setting the season for elk.
And Ashley, this is Jeff, just for Susan, just for context and Ashley's context too. It's a great example because, that was one of the lawsuits we had over the course of the last year was the lawsuit filed early this year that challenged the commission's decision to eliminate all of the female subquotas in Region 1 for spring black bear when that was not either in the staff recommended package or anywhere otherwise noticed up prior to the meeting. It was an amendment that was offered up by, I can't remember if it was Commissioner Burrows or who I can't remember anyways. It was offered up at the meeting, acted upon, and the final reg set eliminated all the female subquotas in Region 1. And we got sued over that, got to the hearing in front of Judge McMahon, and he landed exactly where Ashley is describing. In fact, he was so brutal on the other side that they picked up the phone the next day and said, hey, would you care if I dismiss my lawsuit? Because they didn't want a bad ruling. Judge McMahon was saying, look, the agenda plainly says they're modifying spring black bear regulations in Region 1. There's a staff recommendation to eliminate at least some of the female subquotas. And you're going to sit here and tell me you didn't know that's what the commission was going to consider at this meeting? It was pretty brutal. And it was the same guy that, to be blunt, whooped us up in the Wolf case. He's not a bad lawyer. That's a real good example of so long as you're in the box of your agenda item, whatever kind of amendments come up at the meeting aren't going to be a notice problem or an opportunity to comment problem because you're still acting within the box of what your agenda item was. So that black bear case we had was a great example of that. And then on the prior topic, the case we got again successfully tossed out earlier last year was the 48-hour deal. And if you remember, we got sued over having to fix or proposing to fix some language in the MAPA rule about the wolf management plan. And we were on a clock to get it to the Secretary of State. So we ended up setting the meeting on a Friday afternoon for a Monday morning early special. And for this commission, actually, just so you know, I mean, I come out of the world of school boards and cities, and 48 hours is gold standard. I mean, that's pretty much what everyone operates by. But we've set a standard here that we're really typically much further out ahead of that, as much as 2 weeks or more with agenda items and public comment solicitation. Well, in any event, again, district court judge went right where Ashley just described. Look, the law of the land is 48 hours, and it's not 48 working hours or during the week. It's 48 hours, and there was 60 to 70 hours notice on that meeting for the wolf management plan revamp. And again, that case got tossed out. So good examples of specific situations that commissions had to deal with in terms of open meeting and public notice challenges in just the last couple of years.
Those are great. Thank you. I appreciate those context examples. And that's exactly it. And I love that it was upheld that you followed the 48 hours, because I get that question every time I do a board training. Well, is it 48 business hours or is it 48 hours? The opinion says 48 hours. It doesn't qualify anything. And I think that gives you the space to do what you need to do. It also, I'm very much heartened to hear that you are extending that period out way farther than the 48-hour minimum. Not only does it set expectations that you are actively trying to be transparent and provide opportunity for inclusion and feedback, I also think that it gives you some wiggle room. So if something comes up like, oh man, we really need to adjust this or that, you can do that and still be well within the letter of the law. So I think those are all fantastic practices. Okay, so that's the 48 hours. That's what adequate notice means according to that statute and the AG opinion that clarifies it. The second piece of that is, well, do we want to talk? I do want to talk about this. So I have a couple favorite stories that I like to tell when I do board trainings. And I give the warning that as a public official on a public board, you have a responsibility to uphold all of the rights of all of the citizens everywhere, every time that you meet and interact. It's not citizens of your jurisdiction. It's not citizens of the state. It is citizens. And that's why you will often hear departments getting requests from different states or organizations that are based in different states. And they are legitimate requests under our Constitution because it says the public. It doesn't say the citizens of the state. So I tell folks, when you step into that board position, you are now responsible for protecting the rights of everybody who does not sit on the same side of the table as you're on that board. If you screw that up, a couple of things can happen. You can be held personally liable. So you could be held responsible and have to defend yourself in court, depending on what happens if you're outside of course and scope. You could cost the taxpayers a lot of money if there's a judgment against the decision, even if you're in course and scope and it was not done well, not done appropriately, you could cost them a lot of money. And if you mess up real bad, we will definitely use you as the example as we train around the state. So if it's real bad, you are now the poster child for everybody else. And to that end, I love to tell the story about Great Falls because they set the example for the rest of us to learn from several years ago. They had a city council agenda, which had opening ceremonies, roll call, all of that. They had, what did they have? Approve the meeting minutes from the previous meeting. They had a consent agenda that had a whole bunch of reports and claims and all kinds of things. They would also put like second readings in there, which is not in and of itself inappropriate. A consent agenda, if you are not aware, is an agenda, a portion of the agenda where you can group a whole bunch of motions into one and make a single motion to approve everything all at once. There's definitely a time and a place where it is an appropriate tool, but I always caution folks to not do it without some kind of legal counsel guidance because it is an area of risk. So City of Great Falls had opening ceremonies, their consent agenda, public comment for any items on the agenda, their action items, and then I think some commissioner or council discussion time at the end for correspondence. So they got up, they did their thing. Previous to this meeting, there had been about 6 months of fighting about the change from an animal control officer who was currently a contract service provider from one service provider to another. And it was a big fight in the city. And so they went through the whole thing, heard everybody, finally made the decision, yep, we're going to make the change. They went forward with the contract, and then they realized that the contract date was wrong. So they had about a 6-week gap between when the previous contract was ending and the new contract was starting. They didn't really want at-large animals running around Great Falls for 6 weeks. So in that consent agenda at that meeting, they put the contract date change motion in there so that they can make it right and make them line up. So they opened their meeting, they did their consent agenda, they asked for public comment for the action items on the agenda, and a gal from Vaughan, so she wasn't even a City of Great Falls citizen, she was from Vaughan, she got up and she was really upset with this change and told them for her full 3 minutes how awful they were and what are they thinking and they're terrible people and just on and on and on, right? At the end of the 3 minutes, the mayor said, ma'am, we need you to wrap up your comments. We need to get to the next person. She kept going, kept getting more animated. Finally, they had a plainclothes on-duty detective come up and escort her out of the room, which is the nuclear option. Please, please, please do not do that unless there's imminent danger or somebody is incredibly out of line. You can recess, you can call point of order, you can do lots of things before you have to escort somebody out of the room. So that's what they did. So he got up there, he kind of gathered up her material at the podium. He took her kind of by the elbow and kind of guided her out the back of the room. And as they got to the door in the back of the room, she kneed him in the groin and took off running. So now he's laying on the floor, kind of like trying to function again. She's sprinting through City Hall. She gets out to the sidewalk. They catch up to her. They arrest her. They charged her with disorderly conduct, assaulting a police officer, and evading arrest. So all of that for a 3-minute public comment period, right? So they pressed charges because their detective took one for the team. And she got an attorney. The attorney said, tell me what happened. And she said, I was trying to tell them that this is just such a bad idea and they wouldn't listen and they wouldn't reconsider that decision because they'd already made the consent agenda motion and they voted on it and they wouldn't even think about redoing it. And he said, wait. Public comment happened after the consent agenda, after the decision was made. And she said, yeah. They said, perfect. So they countersued. And they said that the city of Great Falls violated her right to participate prior to final action. This went all the way up to the Montana Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held that because the city did in fact violate her right to participate, everything that happened after that point was the responsibility of the city. So not only could they not continue with the charges against for the detective and for evading arrest and all of that, they had to pay damages, which is kind of a rare occurrence with local government process. Usually the remedy is go back and redo it and do it right. In this case, because it was a violation of an individual's right to participate, and this was, we got to be going on 15 years ago now or so. Court said, City of Great Falls, you will pay $500,000 in punitive damages and another $400,000 in court costs and attorney fees. So 15 years ago, it was $1 million lawsuit because public comment happened after the consent agenda, not before it. That's why these little detail things, as kind of minutia as they feel, are so important to understand and be consistent about every single time you do it. And I tell you that story because the second line of that 23103, assist public participation before a final agency action is taken that is of significant interest to the public. So they made the decision before she had a chance to comment. The question is, who gets to decide what significant interest to the public is? Well, the court will say, and Mazurek in that same opinion says, it's the public's right, so the public gets to decide. So typically we know it's things like land use and rights and privileges and anything to do with money. Those are all always significant interest. What the opinion says is it's anything more than a ministerial act is considered significant interest to the public, which was not super helpful language for those of us who don't speak attorney fluently. But what they're saying is it's anything more than coordinating a meeting time or that kind of thing. Anything that would require any kind of policy discretion from the people that sit in those public seats is considered significant public interest and needs to be on an agenda and discussed at a properly noticed public meeting. So if you get a question from a constituent and they say, do you think that the commission would consider revising this policy? If you send that email on to your colleagues and say, hey guys, this question came in, what do you think? You are now violating the public's right to know because they have a right to observe the deliberations, not just the decision of that thing that affects them, that policy. Are we tracking?
Okay, quick question on that.
Yes.
If you get a comment from a citizen and it's only to you,
Mhm.
you forward that on to the other commissioners, but say, you're not asking for a response, you're just sharing it.
Mhm.
You do that.
Yeah, technically, yes. We have not seen any court cases that have rebuffed that. It's considered one-way communication. As long as nobody responds to it, then you're okay. What I think would be a much safer practice in terms of risk is to have a central repository. And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, because we were just talking about this morning. I would much rather see it go through the meeting packet process than have individual comments sent out to different people. If it has something to do with anything coming up on any of the meetings. If it's just an out of the blue question, you could forward it on and say, for commissioner reference or notice only, no response required, and commission don't respond to it. Another tool, if that does happen, is to forward it out with BCC instead of the CC, because then if somebody accidentally were to respond to it, they would only be able to respond to the person that sent it, not to the entire commission, without adding in everybody else back into it manually. And if that were the case, you have seven commissioners, right?
Yeah.
So you would have to have 4 involved in that back and forth to be considered a quorum. So that one person responding to the original sender would not violate open meeting laws. Does that make sense? Okay. All right.
Oh, I have a question. This is Chair Robinson.
Hi.
Yeah, all right. We have tried to we do not want to respond to all commissioners at the same time period, because we were in a suit before and nothing happened with it, because all I emailed back was, please do not reply all.
Perfect.
And that's still being used in articles today. So everything should go to Eric. Nobody should be sending to all the commissioners anything, in my opinion.
Fantastic. I think that is a great practice. I think it keeps everybody safe, because you don't want people who are doing good work and trying to work for the public end up in hot water because of an email snafu, right? Okay, so what I'm hearing, Chair, then is that everything goes to Eric and he can disperse it out to the rest of the commission when it's appropriate.
Correct. That's the cleanest way to do it. And he never sends an email. Well, I guess he tries not to send an email to a quorum.
Perfect.
He breaks
Perfect.
it into different emails. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I see it's a common practice to do that BCC so nobody can get back to you. But if you've got a system that works, then I say continue on. As long as you're being consistent and there is a reason behind it, I would prefer to have things written down in policy or procedure, so that in our office, we strongly believe that government should be conducted via policy, not by personality. You don't want the way that you do things to be dependent on the person that's in the seat right now. So if you can put that in some kind of procedure to say, this is our standard practice, here's how we do it, then you're protecting, if nothing else, the organization, the commission. If somebody decides to go rogue, you can say, hey, that's not how we do things around here. And do that while you have a commission that understands and is engaged and does things well, because you don't want to have to do that as a reactive or a punitive thing. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on? All right. So now let's look at sub B. Oh, and by the way, agency is says the agency shall publish. I just had pulled up the definition of what an agency is in case you are curious if that actually does apply to you. We're going to look at 23102 is the definitions. An agency means any board, bureau, commission, department, authority, or office of the state or local government authorized by law to make rules, determine contested cases, or enter into contracts except. And it goes into the judicial branch, the governor, a couple other things. So you are included in the term agency under it throughout Title II.
And Ashley, just
just so you know, and other commissioners knows, we do have many years ago published through the MAPPA process, which you don't run across very much in local governments because they're exempt from it principally, but the Administrative Procedure Act stuff. So we actually do have an administrative rule of Montana that sets forth those processes for both the department and the commission in terms of how we will afford opportunities for public comment on matters of significant public interest. And for the commission, it's both in the form of either properly noticed public meetings with an opportunity to comment, or the commission also, like the department or other executive branch entities, also has the authority to adopt rules through the Montana Administrative Procedure Act. And so that's the alternative way we afford public comment for the commission's actions when they're engaging in MAPPA rulemaking. And that's a separate boxed up public hearing, written comment process that the commission authorizes at an open meeting, publicly notice that they're going to authorize the MAPPA rulemaking, and then they close that rulemaking loop at the back end, again at an open meeting, but not by taking public comment at that meeting, but rather just taking action to either adopt, modify, or not adopt the proposed MAPPA rule. But we do have that piece, that base covered through a MAPPA rule for both the commission and the department.
Beautiful. I love it. There have been several times when I've wanted to use the administrative arms details because they have much more detail and it's way more defined than what we have out in local government land, and get pushback on that. So I love to hear that you've already thought through that, and it is protecting everybody involved, because that's what we're after. Okay, so bare minimum for posting a meeting. Now, a meeting is different than a hearing, right? Those are two separately defined things. A meeting, just a general legislative policy-making conversation, could have decisions. That is defined in 23103, how you will notice it. The very bare minimum is that you shall either put it in the newspaper in circulation in the county where the agency is located, if they can publish electronic notices. So it doesn't have to be in print. It needs to be on that local newspaper's website. If that, and if they don't charge you for it. If that's not an option, then you just need to post the meeting agenda on your agency's primary website or social media page, but you all have a website and that's much safer. So the bare minimum for a meeting is just to have that agenda out there at least 48 hours in advance. It sounds like you have procedures in place to go much farther than that, which is fantastic. Do you all post your meeting packet with your agenda? Typically.
Are you talking about the materials, Ashley?
Yeah.
So the same time that the commissioners get the materials is the same time that we go out to public comment.
Okay. Okay.
The materials that the commission gets, the public also gets. And they have that same period. The commissioners obviously have a little bit longer, but the public has that same targeted 30-day period to review the same materials that the commission has.
Wonderful. Okay. This is another area that I get questions on a lot because it says that you need to post the agenda. Statute does not say you need to post the packet, the materials that go with the agenda. I think it is good practice to include that the best that you can. It does give you a little bit of leeway if a piece of documentation comes in later, you can add it without violating open meeting laws. But as much information as you can give the public ahead of time, you're going to be better off because it's showing that you're actively trying to be transparent and give them all of the information. Because at the end of the day, it's still their process. You are facilitating it, you're shepherding it for them, you're making decisions as representative of them, but it's still their process, right? Because it's their service. So they do have a right. I had a city manager one time ask me, well, how much detail do we need to put in the claims, the receipts, basically, right, for what's been expended? And I said, well, I guess, what are you trying to get at? And he said, well, I want to put as little as possible and still be legally compliant because the public's interfering with our business and they're making it harder for us to do what we do. And that was my reaction to Commissioner. I said, let's talk about your perspective here. It's not your business, it's their business. You just happen to be hired to facilitate their business. So I think if we start with that mindset that we are here to serve the public and we are facilitating their process on their behalf, it kind of changes how we think about inclusion of the public in materials and access to agenda and all that kind of stuff. So which it sounds like is not a problem for you all, and that is awesome. All right, so you have to have a meeting posted at least on your website. Here's the other thing. I love to talk about this one. Sub C, the agenda must include an item that allows public comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the agency conducting the meeting. So where is that on your agenda? When do you ask for public comment for items not on the agenda?
That's at the tail end after all of the action items are handled.
Okay. Is there a reason that it's at the end?
Because most of the topics that we handle are well involved, and typically, even when the agenda has to be altered, we still spend the bulk of the time on the action items, and we like to get that out of the way, just because then we're not asking people who have public comment opportunity on a contentious topic to stay much later in the day.
Yep, exactly. Okay. There is no expectation kind of by statute of where you put it in the agenda. I just ask that people be consistent. I've seen people put it at the very beginning, and the argument for that, say at city council meetings, is we might have a single parent who needs to do daycare to get in here to make a comment, and this is the only time they can. We don't want them sitting through 3 hours. I've heard the opposite, which is exactly what you're describing. We put it at the end because we want to prioritize the topics that we told everybody we're going to talk about, and we want the people that came to talk about those topics to be able to do so as efficiently and effectively as possible, and then we'll get to anything that's not on the agenda. Either way is fine. Just do it the same way as much as you can.
This is Leslie again. We also, they can do it on Zoom also. So if they can't sit through the whole entire meeting, they can do it online also.
Okay, thank you. And what does it look like on Zoom? Is it like this where they have audio, video?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes. Some of them, nope. I think it's just their name. I can see their list of their name.
Okay.
Only the panelists are video.
Okay.
I can see a list of their name and they raise their hand, and I call on them if they raise their hand. So, and I try to give ample time for them to, if you can't find your hand to raise or whatever, and I tell them ahead of time to raise their hand so I can see who is online that wants to comment.
Perfect. That sounds exactly like the model of what I would hope would be happening.
Yeah.
And what we'll find in this next statute we'll look at is that a meeting is considered a meeting when the quorum of the constituent body can interact either in person or by electronic means. The big test typically is, can that person hear and respond to the conversation in real time? So I'm less concerned about video. If people have audio access, that tends to be sufficient.
And if I, for some reason, can't get them on, I will move to the next person and come back to that person to give them and sometimes we just can't get their audio, but I will give them several times to be able to make it work.
I think that's perfect. You can only do what you can do in good faith.
Right.
And yeah, and that's it. And this is exactly why I am still a believer that we call the meeting as much as we can in person and have people available in person, even if the entire commission is virtual. If you have a place for people to go in person to make public comment, they have a guaranteed way to interact. And if they choose not to take that up and to do it at home on Zoom, that's fine. And we will do what we can to make sure that you can be a part of that. But you do have a guaranteed alternative if this is really important and you want to do it in person.
Right. We do, because the regional offices allow the people to come, and then I can call on the regional offices and they come up to a podium there. So even when we do it virtually, they have the option.
I love it. Okay. See, we got this. Okay. Any other questions on adequate notice, significant public interest, or how to notice a meeting? Good. Okay. All right. We are 45 minutes into this and we are done with page 1. The rest of it is not that bad, I promise. Okay. We're not worried about city and county stuff for you all. Let's look at page 5. Page 5 is the meat of the open meetings laws.
Ashley?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The materials that you that you sent didn't make it to me. Can you resend those really
Oh,
quick?
dang it. Sure. Hold
Those
on.
way they can follow along.
Yes, yes. Let me retry. Okay, let me know if that doesn't show up in the next 30 seconds. All right. Page 5, when you get it, there's a purple triangle at the top. It says open meeting. So we are looking at Title 2, Chapter 3, Part 2. This is where we find all of those definitions and descriptions of what it means to be in an open meeting. 2-3-202 is the definition of a meeting. So it says that a meeting means a convening of the quorum of the constituent membership of a public agency or association, whether corporal or by electronic means, to hear, discuss, or act on a matter over which the agency has some kind of supervision, jurisdiction, or control. So I like to think about this as, well, let me grab a slide real quick. I think I have this. There are 6 things that make an open meeting. Here we go. Make an open meeting legal. Let me share this screen with you. If you have, so 202 says there has to be a quorum and they are hearing, discussing, or acting on something under their jurisdiction, right? It's not an and. That is a very important conjunction because I've heard this countless times. People say, and especially in small communities where it's just hard to get people on board, they say, well, we didn't have a quorum, so we just talked about what was going to happen, but we didn't make any decisions. It says hear, discuss, or act. So if you have, for some reason, you got 4 of your 7 commissioners sitting together at the Carroll College football game, technically you don't have a meeting because you don't have both of those things true. You do have a quorum, but you're not hearing, discussing, or acting anything under your jurisdiction. But if the 4 of you are sitting together and I walk up and say, hey, commissioners, have you thought about changing the policy on raghorns? Now you've just heard something that's under your jurisdiction. So now outside of your control, you have a meeting and you need to be following all of the open meeting laws, right? So it's hear, discuss, or act. Let me grab this. Oops. Oh, where'd you go? There you are. And I'll share my screen. All right. Can you all see that? Okay. So if you have a quorum and you're going to have any kind of discussion or hear anything about anything that's under your jurisdiction, you must also have the following 4. You need to have an agenda that is clear. You need to have proper notice, so 48 hours or more, which sounds like you guys have covered. You must allow public comment before any final action is taken, and you must have minutes as a record of the meeting. Okay, so if those 2 are true, then you must have the other 4. Now, the other thing that I like to think about, and I'm sure you all are well covered in this, but what does it mean to have a proper agenda? And what I mean by that is, what does your agenda topic say that is clear enough for the general public to understand what you're going to be covering? And a lot of times it's covered in that considered motion, what you'll be considering as a topic. But it may, thinking about a couple of those lawsuits, it may behoove you to have the topic that's defined a little bit broader than the considered motion. Does that make sense? So if you're only talking about changing the bear season, and you're only talking about moving the front or the start date from this week to the next week, that kind of thing, right? And your topic is consider changing the start date of the black bear season from this day to this day. That's a very specific topic, which is helpful for people to know, but that also limits what your amendments could be without getting outside of that scope. Make sense?
I don't
So
think
if
it's
you-
possible. I don't think it's possible for us to have that narrow of a scope unless it was coming back for a change.
Beautiful. Okay. Then we won't worry about it. If you are generally operating with broad scope, then I'm good with it.
We pretty much, with the main motion, we pretty much incorporate like the entire regulation booklet. Do we not? I mean, it's kind of like we're under like the wolf and fur bearer regulate. I guess that would be a question for the department, but I think that it's kind of
Yeah,
like
I think,
overarching.
yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, we operate kind of somewhat akin to, you know, like a big seven municipality in the sense that the commission is almost always working off pretty robust staff packages
Yep.
that have, and what you would call a cover sheet, or we call them a proposal and information sheet. You know, and it has typically a staff recommendation and then draft language for if the staff recommendation is what the commission is inclined to adopt, then that. But then, as Ian just alluded to, particularly in a couple different settings, most frequently when we do the big reg set packages for hunting, fishing, that kind of thing, they're working off of a, you know, functionally a mock-up of what the reg pack you would pick up at the, you know, online or at the regional headquarters would look like. But to your point, we are trying to be a little bit more deliberate about being, you know, general enough in the topic so that, and it goes back to Judge McMahon and the bear regs. We don't, you know, I think as long as we leave enough space in there, you know, generally speaking, for example, in December, the action item will be the commission's adoption of regulations for elk, you know, deer, elk, antelope hunting for the next 2 years. And it's a, you know, a reg pack that's, you know, 1/4 of an inch thick, but the general action item is the adoption of the hunting regulations for those 3 species for the next 2 years. So the public knows that it's wide open. Anyone can come in and make any comment they want about any element of those, you know, proposed regulations. But we have and kind of continue to try to be at the staff level when we put those agendas together, to leave that space for the commission so that we don't, you know, create an unnecessary risk of someone coming back and making the kind of point you made where you say, hey, well, look, the only thing that was put on the agenda was that they were going to, you know, they were going to change the closing date from 1 week to another. Well, like to your point, if you just say, look at the agenda says consideration of an amendment of the closing date, that's enough. The courts
Yes.
are doing that. So
Perfect. I love when I have real attorneys in the room.
I wouldn't,
Okay.
if you ask Clark, that might not be the case, but he might not give you the same assessment, but
Fair. Okay, so I appreciate this, and I love being able to learn with you about how things work in your world, because it's a little bit different. Lots the same, but a little bit different than what we usually see. And it sounds like it's working well for you. Let's see. So we know a meeting is a quorum and you're talking about something. So let's say you have 3 commissioners that are having breakfast together before a commission meeting day, and for some reason you're all together, you're having breakfast together. Can you have conversations as the 3 of you about what's going to be on the meeting agenda without violating open meeting laws? I have to grab chapstick. Hold on just a second. So would it be a violation of an open meeting law for 3 of the 7 commissioners to have a conversation at breakfast about something that they're going to talk about? The answer is technically no, right? Because 23202 tells us that there needs to be a quorum and they need to be hearing, discussing, or acting something under their jurisdiction. So technically 3 of the 7 could have a conversation and not violate those open meeting statutes. It's not good practice. Let me be clear. I would not recommend doing that, but doesn't put you necessarily in legal trouble. However, those 3 have that conversation, you kind of get a sense of where everybody's at, and then one of those 3 commissioners goes to the post office and sees a 4th commissioner and says, hey, colleague, here's what we had a conversation about. What do you think? Even though those first 2 commissioners are not in the room with it, that is now considered a violation of the open meeting laws. It's what they call a walking meeting or a chain meeting. It's little e ex parte communication. The idea is, if you think back to constitutional right number 9, the public has the right to observe deliberations prior to final action, right? 4 of the 7 now have some kind of policy inclination, some leaning about how they're going to feel about this decision. And that discussion happened outside of the view of the public. So watch out for that, for those chain meetings that accidentally could come up when you have 2 commissioners here and 2 commissioners here, and you both had a conversation, and then one of each of those came together and had another conversation. That's an area for potential risk. So just be careful that you're not having those deliberations in any form outside of the view of the public, so you don't put yourself in a situation that you have to defend.
Ashley,
Thoughts on that? Yeah.
real quick? We had this come up, and it doesn't happen very often, but we had a vacated commissioner's position.
Mm.
We only had 6 of the 7 positions filled. And I don't know if the commissioners know this or not, but the quorum doesn't change based on the number of active commissioners. If there's 7 positions, the quorum is still 4. So just because that position's not filled doesn't mean that the quorum number dives. It doesn't go down. It's still based on the total number of available positions. So even when Region 1 was vacated, your quorum still stayed at 4. And that may be something we don't ever run into again, but it's worth mentioning, I think.
Well, and even, Eric, I think that's a good point. And even if it did, let's say it did drop, you would still need 4 of the 6, right? Because 3 of the 6 would still not be.
And that I should have continued that thought. That's where I was going with that, is you still would need 4 of the 6. It doesn't change the number that you need to make a decision.
Yep, exactly. Perfect. Thank you. Any more questions on quorums?
I have a quick one.
Sure.
I guess as far as general discussions and whatnot. Okay, so we're past our August contentious wolf meeting, whatever. If we have a follow-up conversation, kind of talking about next year, like it's not even on the agenda yet, but yeah, I mean, I guess is that you get together with some commissioners and you're talking about, future events that aren't even on the agenda. Is that still a gray area, or?
That is a great question. And what we tell folks, because we are risk averse in our office, we want to keep you out of hot water. That does still count, because it's still something that's under your jurisdiction as a body, even if you're not considering it formally on agenda. You are discussing something that you have some kind of authority over. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make it easy. It makes it really, really difficult to function efficiently. And we like to say that local government and state government is not meant to be efficient. It's meant to be fair and effective. And about the best you could hope for is maybe 70% efficient. It's just built into the system. The tensions are there for a reason, but it doesn't make it easy to operate in. That was a great question. Anything else?
Okay, just further on that, because when you have this big commission that we have, and we do talk about, like, if I talked to Ian and said, hey, I'm thinking about this for the wolf season, and we have that conversation, the 2 of us, at what point if Ian calls another commissioner and says, hey, I'm hearing some stuff about this on the elk season setting. But he doesn't mention, he's saying he's thinking about it. I was thinking about it. I mean, it seems like there's a little bit of you still have to be able to talk about stuff, but not say, well, Commissioner Brooks said X, Y, and Z. So what do you think about this? And then the next commissioner, and pretty soon you have a quorum of 4.
Yep.
So
Yep. No, I think you're absolutely right.
Without getting yourself into that you violated the open meetings.
So this is one of those gray areas that if you don't have procedure, I would encourage you to consider clarifying that so that you have clear lines, everybody knows they're safe. But what I would say is typically the line is very blurrily drawn between information and evaluation. So it's one thing to say, hey, I've heard this comment come up a few times. But it's something different to say, hey, I've heard this comment come up a few times. I think we should consider changing this reg. Does that make sense?
You can't even have that with one commissioner?
You could have it with one. Technically, you could have it with up to 2 other commissioners. You just need to be careful about hopping between commissioner groups.
That I have a fault. This is Leslie. That was my question too, because some of it's just informational because a certain commissioner knows more about their region or whatever. It's
Mhm.
more like questions of just informational, not
Mhm.
trying to sway a vote or see what their
Yep.
vote is.
Yep. And this is where I would say, talk to your legal counsel, make sure that they're going to be able to back you because they're the ones that have to defend it. But I think you're probably pretty low risk if you're just asking for information and not evaluating. Don't do it in email because it's never going to
Yeah.
look good in email.
100%. And I think that is one of the most frustrating things for anybody serving on a board or commission is that sometimes you feel a little, hamstrung by some of these principles. But I think at the end of the day, at least as of now, there's nothing. In fact, there's a conversation about it. I think in one of the old, it's one of the cases involving a commission appointed by Governor Roscoe about, talking amongst yourselves individually. I mean, these jobs are hard enough that the idea that you can't have a conversation with one of your peers about, something that you're going to have to be confronting in your position, that just isn't workable. The bigger rub is doing it in sort of a chain fashion where you're connecting that, or you're turning it into some sort of conversation. At the end, to Ashley's point, you're turning it into a conversation with a quorum in some way, shape, or form that's not visible to the public. And so I guess I've just always told people, look, I think you have to talk amongst yourselves as peers because some of this stuff is sticky, it's complicated, and there's nothing wrong with getting your peers' perspectives on a one-on-one basis on some of these things. It's not that, and I guess that's a good paradigm that Ashley's proposed, is sort of the, information versus evaluation. It's just not pivoting it to some place where you're becoming decisional in those conversations. It's really more about sharing that information, making sure everybody's on the same page. And as long as that's typically happening on a one-on-one basis, it just hasn't yet turned into a legal problem.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it seems to be a pretty low risk. And if and when we have case law that changes that, we will advise otherwise. But yeah, it's a hard place to be. And we want everyone to do a good job. The one thing that I will share that I think is helpful to remember is that while you are appointed likely for your expertise in some area, it is also appropriate and expected that you are learning in and alongside the public as things happen. So you do want to go in, you kind of got your ducks in a row, right? But you don't have to have and shouldn't have the predefined answer before you go into a meeting, because that's the whole point of the meeting, right? That's why we don't do proxy voting. Because if you had a proxy vote because you weren't going to be at the meeting, but we told the public that their public comment can impact the way that we vote, those two things are mutually exclusive, right? Because you, by definition, did not listen to their comment before you made a decision. So I think coming into those conversations as prepared as you can be, but also recognizing that the public will respect and trust you more and allow you to be more effective and efficient in what you do if you show them that you are learning alongside them, you're asking the questions that they have, you're taking information and you're processing it in real time with them. That is not a bad thing. That's how the system should work. And you should be making decisions with them seeing the logic happen. And on that note, since we're there, I am a fan, especially with contentious topics, of voting with reason. And what I mean by that is when you get to a final vote, each commissioner does their vote, but they explain just a little bit about the main things that you're weighing, because nothing's ever cut and dry, right? There's good points on both sides, and calling those out help the public recognize that you're not just there to rubber stamp things. You are taking this seriously. You're thinking about it critically. And this decision happens to weigh out just on balance on this side. That helps build trust and rapport with the people that you serve. Other thoughts about quorums? All right, let's talk about 23203. This is the statute that tells us when you don't have to do an open meeting, even though you are still subject to all the open meeting laws as a body. There are essentially 2 times that you can close a meeting to the public and still be legal. The first is when so it's 203 sub 3, presiding officer may close the meeting when the discussion relates to a matter of individual privacy. Because remember, that's constitutional right number 10. So individual privacy, and only if that presiding officer determines that the demand for individual privacy clearly exceeds the demand for the public's right to know, or the merits of public disclosure. The right of the individual privacy may be waived, and in that case, it has to be open because it's the individual's privacy, not the agency's privacy. And then it has to be an open meeting where everybody's allowed in. So that's the first way. I don't know, do you all ever run into situations where you have to deal with public-private information or personal private information? That makes sense.
Not since I've been on. I can't.
Okay.
We don't have personnel.
Right.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
for me is one of the only ones.
Yeah, which that is fantastic because that's a whole area that you don't have to deal with.
Yep.
Okay. The other time that you can close a meeting legally is to discuss litigation strategy against a private party if having the meeting open would be detrimental to your litigating position. The important thing there, so you can have a conversation about about litigation with your attorney and have a closed meeting if it's against a private party. But if you're suing the feds or the county suing you or any public to public is happening, there is no expectation of privacy. Those strategy meetings must be open, and you can guarantee opposing counsel is going to be sitting in the audience listening to the whole thing. So that's a thing. So really, the only time you're going to close a meeting is in regard to litigation against a private party. Questions or thoughts on that? Okay. Do you all operate with committees of the commission? No, like working groups or like we're going to put 3 commissioners on this thing and 2 commissioners on this thing. It's not a thing.
No,
Okay.
we haven't done it. I think I've been on here 5 years. We have never done that.
Never done that. Okay. I think that is good practice. As long as you can get through everything you need to, the fewer committees that we have to deal with, I think the cleaner it is. The only note I would make on that is if you do at some point in the future consider creating a committee of the board, it's just important to recognize, and this is in 203 sub 6, any committee created by a public agency. So if you were to create a committee of 3 or commissioners, that new committee has to follow all of the same open meeting laws. And just because you put 3 and not 4 commissioners on there doesn't mean that you get around it. The new body of 3 commissioners on that committee is its own entity with its own standards. So any 2 of those 3 commissioners on the committee meeting, having a conversation about anything under their jurisdiction would constitute a quorum in a public meeting. So it's what we see in like city government is they'll try to put, not understanding what statute means, they'll try to put 2 of their 5 council members on a committee because they think, well, because we don't have 3 of the 5 council, we don't have to do open meeting laws. You do. It doesn't matter what their other board positions are. That new body is its own thing. So if you get there, we can talk about it. And there's ways to do it and make sure that everybody's protected. But if you don't have to, then I think it's cleaner not to. All right. 23211. Anybody's allowed to record any meeting. They don't have to tell you. They don't have to be a member of the press. Montana is a 2-party consent state, except in the cases of open meetings because there is no expectation of privacy. So just know that anybody could be recording or live streaming at any time, and that is legal. You have to keep minutes of every meeting that you're in. Do you all do written record or do you use your audio video as the official record?
We use the YouTube recording as the official record, but we also pay to have every meeting transcribed.
Perfect. Okay. And do you timestamp that YouTube video with your agenda?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. Okay. Then I don't need to tell you anything about that. You got it. Yeah, we're good with that. And everything's already recorded, so that's fine. Okay, I think that's all we needed with the open meeting proper. I do want to talk a little bit about meeting management, but before we do that, have you all reviewed and had some kind of education on the code of ethics, the state code of ethics? Ooh,
We have, except for probably Ian. I'm not sure if you've had that yet.
It doesn't sound familiar, but
okay. Well, let me just give you a high level overview, and then if you have questions, we can go for that. So you're looking at start on page 13 of that packet, Montana Code of Ethics. This is Title 2, Chapter 2, Part 1. You are bound by this statewide code of ethics as a public officer. A couple of things to note. Look at page. Oh, we moved it all. There it is. 15. 22103 is an important statute. It says the holding of a public office or employment is a public trust created by the confidence that the electorate reposes in the integrity of that public officer. That public officer shall carry out the individual's duties for the benefit of the people of the state. If you have conduct that departs from that, you are liable to the people of the state and subject to penalties provided in this part for abuse of the public's trust. What they're saying is we're offering you some outsized voice, some outsized power than the general citizen. That is because we trust you. And if you violate that trust, you can be held personally, legally accountable to that. So then if we look at 22104, easy ways to figure out what that means. As a public officer, number one, you cannot disclose confidential information acquired in the course of your official duties to further your individual personal economic interest. The example I used to give was if you were on the planning board in Belgrade and you found out that the ag land that's just outside of town was going to be bought by Amazon for a warehouse, could you go buy the land right next to it, knowing full well that it's going to go up in value because it can be annexed in a commercial district as soon as they get there? The answer is no, if that information is not already readily available to the public. If you know about it because you sit on that board and nobody else has access, you can't then take action to benefit yourself based on that information that you know. Can't use that anymore because Amazon did put a warehouse in Belgrade, so that's a ruined hypothetical. Okay. So you can't disclose information. Thoughts?
quick question on that, or maybe relative to, so individuals shall carry out the individual's duty for the benefit of the people of the state. We get a lot of people, weighing in from other states about, how we manage our state's wildlife and, kind of, I don't know, just maybe a general discussion on, and maybe it's something you haven't really contemplated, but you have a non-resident that, I mean, they're, I guess technically they would be like a, not only stakeholder, but a beneficiary in that, I mean, if they're paying $1,300 or whatever for a non-resident deer and elk tag versus, somebody that's a wolf watcher or something that comes in and just visits Yellowstone. And I guess, I mean, is there, I guess, weighing on the balance beam of, whose comments hold more weight? I don't know. Do you have any just kind of general discussion and kind of how we, because we get a lot of people weighing in from other states that say that we're not upholding their rights or whatever, but I don't necessarily think that, a non-financial partner from another state necessarily holds the same weight as a resident comment, or, maybe just a general discussion on that.
Sure. Yeah, no, that is a fantastic question. I think we can do a little bit of bifurcation between the constitutional right to participate and this statutory obligation for you all as public officers. So the constitutional right is that the public has the right to comment. So if that's the case, then all comments hold equal weight, right? In theory. But your decision-making is broader than just public comment. So your decision-making responsibility takes in all these other things, all this data, all of these regs, all of these things that are beyond just public sentiment. While it's an important part, it is still only a part. So they absolutely have a right to comment at those meetings, and they can tell you that they think that you are not upholding their right to hunt or not hunt wolves, whatever it may be. Your job is to listen to them earnestly and authentically, and then make decisions that benefit the people of the state, i.e., is it consistent with the Constitution? Is it consistent with statute? And is it consistent with the expectations of existing policy, regs, those kind of things? Or are you changing it in some manner that is still consistent with that, but will benefit the people of the state? Your primary responsibility is to the people, technically, to the people that elected the governor that put you in this role, right? So your responsibility is to the citizens of the state. The only time it gets broader than that really is when you're talking public comment specifically. That would be my opinion. Jeff, do you have anything different that you would add? Did we lose him? We might have lost him. Eric, what about you? Have you heard anything different from the department side? I think everybody's ignoring me now.
It's just something that I mean, I think there is a little bit of misconception with the public that, you know, somebody writing in from California holds the same. Well, there's, you know, there was 1,000 comments against this proposal and there was 10 for it. You guys don't listen to public comment. Well,
yeah,
if they are an in-state stakeholder and beneficiary, I mean, I think it's versus 1,000 non-residents, and you know, I mean, I feel like it's justified to weight things and, you know, take that into consideration. But obviously, the public gets pretty crossed up and confused on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and reminding them that public comment is, especially verbal public comment, is one way, even written, one way that people can interact, and it's a very small sample size of the population. Typically, it's not even a significant sample size, right? So you only hear from people when they are really happy or really mad. You usually don't get the in-between. And this is something we see with the local governments as well, is what sounds like the loudest voice in the room and the people that are all on the same page often represents less than 10% of the electorate's decisions. But it's hard to explain that to people in the heat of the moment when they're already passionate and emotional and they're saying, we are overwhelmingly showing up to tell you we don't like this. And your scope is broader than just that conversation. So when we get into meeting management here in a little bit, we'll talk about setting expectations. I think that's one of the things that you should do, especially with a contentious topic, helping them understand how their interaction fits into the larger picture. So they know that you're not just there to listen to whoever decided to show up tonight. You're there to listen to them and all of these other things, because you are not responsible just for the group that is passionate about this. You are responsible to the entire state, and balancing the needs of 1 million+ people is never going to be easy. There's never going to be a clear-cut answer. And again, the best you can do is about 70%, because there's always going to be valid arguments on the other side of whatever decision you make.
That's helpful. I appreciate it.
Sure. All right. Anybody else before we move on? Okay. So don't share information that if it's confidential and you received it in course of your official duty. Second, we're still in 22104 sub B. You may not accept a gift of substantial value or substantial economic benefit tantamount to a gift. Meaning, so that second one is a little bit wonky. Basically, it means you can't accept, let's say the current interest rate on a mortgage is 6.79. And you have a banker who really wants you to pass this one reg because they like hunting this one thing. They say, if you pass this reg, I will give you a mortgage rate of 4.3%. Technically, no money has changed hands, but that would be an economic gift that you would benefit from, that would be substantial. because of your position in this public duty. So that's what they mean by that. The much easier version of that is a gift of substantial value, which if you look back on page 13, substantial value is $100 or more. They just approved that change in the legislature this last session, or maybe 2 sessions ago now, from 50 to 100. I complained for a decade that 50 was not keeping up with inflation, and it finally was changed. What that means is that if somebody wants to take you to dinner and have a conversation, as long as it's not over $100, that's fine. Or if they want to buy you a coffee when you're in town, that's fine. But if anything could reasonably be valued at $100 or more and could tend to, that's a second piece of this, tend to improperly influence a reasonable person in their position to depart from the faithful and impartial discharge of their public duty. So what it's saying is if it's over $100 and it looks like it could sway you to change or to make a decision that's in their benefit, that's considered unethical under the state ethics statutes. So just keep it under $100. Don't take things that come from people who have a vested interest in whatever conversation's happening right now. But also the reason that we have that flex between 0 and 100, we saw this play out in Bozeman. So do you remember in 2009 when the R-bar blew up on Main Street in Bozeman? And they had fantastic emergency response. It was an awful day. I was in town that day. It was awful. And the emergency responders, the fires, EMT, police, they did just an amazing job. For the next 6 months, they could not go out and eat dinner in the city of Bozeman without somebody buying their meal, right? And they had a little boy come into the fire station that made his cupcakes with his mom, and he was so proud of them. Mr. Firefighter, thank you for keeping our community safe. Here's our cupcakes. The problem with all of that was that Bozeman, well-intentioned, but kind of impractically included in their own additional code of ethics above and beyond the state code of ethics, that they wanted their employees to be above reproach. They wanted them to accept no gifts of any kind of value for any reason, as long as they were an employee or an elected official of the city. So that little boy that comes into the fire station with his cupcakes, the firefighters technically can't accept that. The buying dinners downtown, they can't do that. So what it did is it put the frontline people who are interacting with the community in a really awkward position where they had to, in some ways, erode trust and relationship with the community in order to not violate the city's code of ethics. They have since retracted that and are not so hard-lined on it. But that's why there's any kind of wiggle room in there at all, is because there are times where it is appropriate to engage with people and build relationships and share with your constituents over a coffee or a meal or whatever it is. But we don't want people to get sideways with the law while they're trying to connect with their people. Questions or thoughts on that? Okay, the last thing that I want to call out for the code of ethics, I mean, you can read all of it if you want, but I think those 2 things, and then 22121 on page 16, 22121. Public officer or employee may not use public time, facilities, equipment, letterhead, supply, personnel, or funds for your private business. You also may not use any of those same things on page 17, 22122 to solicit support or opposition to any political committee, nomination for election of a person to public office, or passage of any ballot issue. So what they're saying is be very careful, because you are a public official, that you are not representing yourself as a commissioner of the board who is opposed to this ballot issue or this person in office. You don't lose your right to participate in the democratic process as a private individual by virtue of your service on the board. You need to be very, very clear about when you're representing the board and when you're representing yourself as a private citizen. So things that I get a little bit iffy about because of this statute is things like having campaign signs in your yard. Because when are you on public time and when are you on private time? You don't have office hours, right? So it's hard to say. So we could say, well, this commissioner has this sign for this sheriff's candidate in their yard. Looks to me like the commissioner is supporting this, not you as a private individual. So just be thoughtful about how you are potentially perceived in the with and by the public, with any kind of support or opposition against any ballot issue or candidate.
What about, I guess, before I was selected for this position, I mean, I've testified a number of times at the state legislature. I
Mhm.
guess as far as introducing yourself, I mean, is it inappropriate to say that, you know, you are a game commissioner here representing yourself, or do you just represent your name? I mean, what
Mhm.
what would be the line there?
So I will defer to your legal counsel because I am a product of the university system and they have trained us to the nth degree that we are not allowed to do anything. I don't know that that's necessarily appropriate for you all. There may be times when you should be up in front of the legislature as part of your official role. But before you go testify, I would check with legal counsel to say, should I be representing myself as a commissioner or as a private citizen with this issue?
I mean, I would think most of the time private
Probably.
citizen. I was just kind of curious as far as introduction or whatnot. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean,
So what I would say is unless there is a discussed reason that you should be representing yourself as the commission, because if you go in there and say, I'm a commissioner, then you are representing the position of the body. Unless that needs to happen, I would just introduce yourself with your name, resident of X place, and if you're a business owner or work for a company, or if any of that's important, that's fine, as long as it's consistent with their policies. But I would only do your role here if it had something that the body actually wanted to take a position on.
I guess, Ian, are you asking like just more of trying to get it out there that he is a commissioner, but he is there on his personal behalf. He is not testifying on as his role as commissioner.
yeah, I guess an appropriate introduction. You know, I mean, is it if you're, you know, I mean, say that there, I mean, you know, I mean, there's tons of pertinent things that go through the legislature that have, you know, I mean, I have a personal vested interest in, you know, I mean, if they pass state law to adjust a hunting regulation or something, or season dates, or, you know, I might come there with personal interest. I mean, is it, you know, Ian Wargo, Region 1 Game Commissioner here representing myself? If you, I mean, if you clarify that, is that, you know, I don't know, or
Sure.
do you just ignore the fact that you're?
So again, talk to your legal counsel, because what I would say is if this is the most risk averse take on this, if I was sitting on that hearing committee and you came in and told me that you were a commissioner but representing yourself, you told me you're a commissioner to give it extra weight, even though you said you're representing yourself. So what would be the intent of saying that other than to elevate your status? Right? That's the most like risk averse option. So just make sure you're safe and talking to people, and then do what you need to do.
So question, I guess specific
Yeah.
question. I've been approached by, we had at our August meeting, there was a conservation easement that we voted on, this Great American Outdoors Phase 2, whatever. It's a big conservation easement west of Kalispell. There's a, you know, a lot of sportsmen have kind of a vested interest in that. I was approached by the I guess the landowner, you know, to because I was from Kalispell and it kind of, you know, represents, you know, folks in my area. Hey, would you mind showing up to the land board meeting in October? Like,
Sure.
I guess, I mean, maybe that, yeah, I guess maybe that'd be a legal question for the department. One, is that appropriate? Can I show up and testify? And if I do, what sort of introduction would?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic question. And I think clarifying it before you get in there and accidentally getting sideways with something would be really helpful. We don't want you to not engage in your local civic life, right? We just want to make sure that you're not putting yourself or the board at risk. Yeah, that's definitely an attorney question. How's that for a non-answer? All right. Oh, these are good. Okay, I think that is all we really need to cover high level for the code of ethics. There's a whole bunch in there. But I don't think we need to spend a bunch of time on the rest of it. Do we want to take a break before we get into meeting management? Would it be helpful? Yes. All right. Let's take like a 7-8 minute break and we'll come back here and finish up with meeting management and parliamentary procedure. See you in a few.
Okay, the recording is back on. We can continue at your leisure, Ashley.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have talked about open meeting laws, constitutional rights, code of ethics, recording meetings and minutes. I think that gets us through most of the structural things. Now we'll switch into meeting management and some of the things that tips and tricks and just things to be aware of. So the first thing I want to call out is just thinking about your individual role as a commissioner inside of a commission meeting. You only have authority as a single vote of 7 inside of a properly noticed meeting, right? That's the time that you have a power to make a decision that can impact everybody, really. Outside of that, you have no kind of executive function authority to direct duties and staff and that kind of thing. So we need to make sure that everything that's happening that needs to impact any process or policy happens inside of that meeting in a proper manner so that it can stand any test. So let's talk about how your meetings are set up. Does anybody have any, or could you give me just an overview of how you typically run your meetings, kind of structure? Do you do reports first? Do you do action items first? What do you do and why?
So the agenda that we use, and I sent you a copy of the agenda that we used in August. And so we do the administrative functions first. So just running through minutes, expenses, commissioner reports. The director provides a short report on where the agency is on key topics that affect the commissioner that the commission could evaluate at some point. And then once that's done and the chair feels comfortable moving into action items, then she goes right in, and we usually follow the agency title. So it's usually fish first, then wildlife, then parks, and then anything after that from the divisions that we bring in. Usually land and water has something for us, and occasionally we'll have enforcement and legal weigh in. Okay.
All right, great. And also on the note of looking at the agenda, I really appreciate that you have the instructions for engaging virtually at the top. I think that is great practice, so that people feel like they truly can engage even if they're not in the room. Okay. Let's see, what do we need to talk about? We need to talk about what meetings, talk about closed meetings. There we go. First, I am going to share my screen and show you a online course. If our conversation today is not enough for you around parliamentary procedure and public meetings, a couple years ago created an online course that covers public meetings and parliamentary procedure specifically for Montana's Title II, and we use Robert's rules, but you can apply it with any governing system. So if you go to msulocalgov.org, and then in this search box, the fastest way to find this is to search ParliPro for public officials. And that will bring you to this landing page. This is a free, self-paced online course. We cover, think about this, cover why you use some parliamentary system, who it protects and why, how to make a main motion, an amendment to the main, an amendment to the amendment, call the question, and divide the question. Those are the 5 actions that we cover in the course. It's broken, I think, into 6 units, 5 or 6 units. You can take any or all of them. There is no expectation that you finish it all. Whatever serves you, it's there as a resource for you. Okay. Now that I've shared that with you, let me pop this up. Nope, not that. I'll look for it. I have a board chair script that I want to share with you. So as we're thinking about setting the meeting up, every time that you have a meeting, you need to set the expectation for the public that's in the room or virtually joining you. what they can expect about what the meeting will look like, how it will flow, and when they will be able to engage and how. If you do not set those expectations for them, they will still have expectations. They're just going to be different than yours. So that means that they are, by definition, probably going to be frustrated or disappointed with whatever's happening, right? But if you set the expectations ahead of time, then what they experience will match the expectation. So let me grab this screen. There we go. So I created a mock meeting as one of our training tools at the center. This one is for a community center. It started as a county commission meeting. There's lots of versions. The important thing is each of those roles that play in the mock meeting have a script. And I think this board chair script can be really helpful to think about how you set expectations at the beginning of the meeting for the public. So you'll see it has a thanks for joining us. I want to share a few thoughts. There's agendas available for everyone. So calling out where the material is in the room or online. There are dedicated public comment periods. We talk about it's authorized. You have a right to it. We'll make sure it happens. In this particular agenda, you can see the public comment period is bolded and italicized. So in that introduction, the chair would say, if you take a look at your agenda really quick, let's take an example of, we'll look at the fish action items. Under action item B, you'll see here, public comment is highlighted. That's the time that we will ask for public comment before we take final action on that topic. This is at the discretion of the board chair, so you will wait to be recognized by the chair. She will recognize you. You will have 3 minutes, whatever your timeline is, to share your thoughts. Please keep in mind that public comment is meant to be a time for the public to inform the body that's making the decision about their thoughts or concerns, the topic at hand. It is not a time for public Q&A or public debate. You are to address the body through the chair. We do not tolerate individual attacks on individual commissioners. We are going to stay to the topic at hand. So you'll be addressing the body through the chair, however formal that looks for you, right? But calling out these times that they will engage and showing them on the agenda when it'll show up can be helpful. We're talking to the person who has never attended a public meeting, who's fired up about something, and they want to make sure that they can be successful in engaging where it's appropriate, okay? And then you'll also see in that intro script, it references the public participation guide on the back of the agenda. So if you do not have this as a current practice, I think this is a great plan to help people have a common set of expectations of how we're going to behave. So in this case, this particular board, the Helena Civic Center Advisory Committee, adopted as part of their bylaws this public participation guideline. And it says that you'll wait to be invited by the speaker. You need to step to the front of the room, give your name. You can do written comment, but it needs to be a certain amount of time before the meeting. Sounds like you all have great processes there already. While the board's in session, members of the public must preserve order and decorum. Any person who is using indecorous or abusive language will be basically barred from continuing to participate. Public comments limited to 3 minutes per person per agenda item. We say that because if it says 3 minutes per person per topic, there's an argument that they could make that I started on bear season, but now I'm talking about waterfowl, and now I'm going to talk about cow elk. And they could have one comment period that they've stretched out to 10 minutes because it's a different topic. So 1 comment per agenda item. So I like having some kind of expectation that they can see and read and be held accountable to, because we know that the expectations were set at the beginning, and that if they behave in a way that is not in accordance with this, there is an appropriate way to stop them from disrupting the meeting. Here's the deal. You have 2 things that you're protecting under state law / constitution, and it has been kind of confirmed by the 9th District Court, and that is that the public has a right to participate. The entire public has a right to participate. So you need to set up a framework where everybody has an equal opportunity. If one person is grandstanding and taking a bunch of time, they are not allowing the rest of the public to participate, right? So that's why we put time limits in there so that everybody has equal opportunity. They also, the public is not allowed, and this is statutory in Montana, it's not allowed to disrupt the process of a public body, meaning they cannot filibuster you in a meeting. Okay, so that's how we kind of broad lens think about these things. The public has a right to participate, everybody, not just one, and they can't disrupt the public process to a degree that doesn't allow you to finish your business. Ninth District Court says that, well, let me back up. The first argument we hear against that is you are violating my constitutional right to free speech. Okay. Ninth District Court says that public meetings are what they call a limited public forum, and that the agency or body does have the right to adopt policies and procedures that provide a framework and guideline for what is appropriate to expect for behavior and participation. So by limiting their public comment to 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, you are not violating their constitutional right to free speech because you are operating in what is known as a limited public forum. Now, one thing that the legislature, our state legislature does that I do not like, it makes me really uneasy in terms of protecting those constitutional rights in Montana. We'll see that they will allow public comment for 2 minutes or 3 minutes per person, and then it'll stretch on and they'll say, okay, now we're only going to allow 1 minute per person. And now we're only going to allow people to stand up and oppose or agree, right? The thing that concerns me about that is that person who is at the end of the line, who was only allowed to stand up and oppose, didn't get to participate in a substantial way or material way prior to final action. So there is a real risk that they could bring a lawsuit and say, the way that I was allowed to participate was inconsistent with others in the room. They got a greater voice than I did. You violated my right to participate prior to final action, and I was harmed in the process. So basically you owe me damages. That's a pretty strong court case. So it's not that you can't do that. It's not, I'm not telling you that it's illegal per se, but I think it does open you up to a big risk if you limit people in different ways for public comment. Thoughts on that?
Leslie does a great job with that.
Okay.
Let everybody participate.
Awesome. Okay. All right. So
I just have to say that I couldn't get unmuted. I follow legal's advice. I don't make a move on anything like that unless I have the approval of our legal.
awesome.
So, and the only time that happens and I usually try to get a count at the beginning, and I'll give like a certain amount of time. And then I ask how many are left. And if it's gone over time, but there's only a few left, I make sure that they all get the same. But if it's, I don't, yeah, it's very seldom, I guess, that we're in that.
Okay. Well, as long as your legal counsel is able to defend your actions, I will always, I mean, I'm always going to defer to them because they're real attorneys. I just educate people. But as long as they can defend what you're doing, I say, move forward. Let me grab, I was showing Eric this earlier. Very proud of it. Because I'm a trainer, I carry all the tools with me. This is a little digital hourglass. And whether you use this form or a kitchen timer or whatever, I think it is great practice to have whatever your comment period time is per person, have it displayed somewhere so everyone can see that everyone's getting the same amount of time. And that when that timer goes off, they need to be done and the next person is up. I think that there inherently is a low level of trust that people are going to be treated fairly when they come into a contentious or in their perception a contentious meeting. So showing and proving that everybody's getting equal treatment can only help you in building that rapport with the people. The other thing that let's talk about what I've seen work well if you do have a contentious topic is the following flow. So we're going to use fire districts for an example because that's not you all. So I'm not going to get into hot water with an example. And my husband accidentally became the volunteer fire chief in our small town. So I am intimately involved with all things fire lately. to the point. Okay, quick story. So he was appointed interim fire chief, and I said, well, how long is your term? He goes, I don't know. So well, what do your bylaws say? He goes, I don't know. I don't know if we have bylaws. So he calls another guy and says, hey, do we have bylaws? And I can hear this conversation. And he goes, I don't think we have bylaws. We just do things. And it gets real quiet. And he goes, you know, I can't tell her that, right? This is what she does. So that ended in me and my community service for the year is writing bylaws for the rural fire district in our community. All of that to say, I can use them as an example so we don't get sideways with some current content. So let's say that on the next meeting agenda, we have fire truck. Well, having fire truck on the agenda, just fire truck, is not adequate notice, right? Because we don't know what we're doing with the fire truck. The public, if they were to pick it up with no context, would not know, are we painting it? Are we insuring it? Are we buying it? Are we letting the kids ride on it because they won state? Like, what's happening, right? So you need to be specific enough in that topic, like we talked about, that the public could understand. So let's say it's, we are considering the purchase of a 2008 pumper truck to put out on the south end of the district. That is clear, right? For $78,000. That's clear. And let's say that there has been some social media activity that has ended in people being very frustrated, thinking that the fire district is just wasting money and just spending money just to spend money because the chief wants a cool new toy, right? Say that happens. So they come to the meeting, you got a bunch of people in the room that are angry, fired up, and they are chomping at the bit for public comment. You need to control that flow to help decrease the temperature in the room as much as you can. And the way that you can do that is, first, the commission, or in that case, the fire district board, needs to be very aware of the concerns of the public. Do not, please, 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 do not engage as a body on social media. You won't win. It's not the place that we've defined is the appropriate public square to have these civic conversations, but do pay attention to what's going on out there. Pay attention to what people are saying in the community, online, at the coffee shop, whatever. Have those questions and concerns ready to go. And it is great for the commission to ask those same questions that the community has in a controlled environment, because then you can hear the answer without people interrupting. And the public is seeing that you have the same concerns they do, right? You're not just there to rubber stamp it. You actually have concerns about this. So let's say they get into the meeting. The in my opinion, best flow to kind of control that temperature is to have the expert presenter present first. In this case, you'd have the fire chief come in and say, hey, we need this pumper truck. We knew when we started the district 10 years ago that the folks on the south end of the district were going to be in insurance rating an ISO of 10 because we don't have a good response time out there. And we had planned to get an additional truck to put out on the south end. So we started a capital improvement fund 10 years ago and have been putting $10,000 a year away in that fund. So we have the money already. Your rates are not going to go up. That's the first thing we heard on social media, right? Was they're going to raise our rates. Rates aren't going to go up. Here's why we need it. Here's what it's going to do for us. Here's the expected outcome, the maintenance cost, all the things. So you get that initial presentation with all the facts out there that can address many of those questions. Then you have the board ask questions of the expert presenter. So those board members are asking, well, you said it's a $78,000 truck, but I'm a little bit concerned about what the maintenance costs are going to be, even though the fire chief may have said that, right? Ask again, because we know people are concerned about that. So tell me again, what are the expected maintenance costs over the lifetime of this piece of equipment? Then once those discussion or those initial questions are done, then the board has, or the commission has deliberations between them amongst themselves. Once that's done, then you open it up for public comment, reminding the public that the comments are to inform the board. They are not to ask questions or try to grill the expert presenter, in this case, the chief. The chief did not stand for election or was not appointed into a position where they are in the decision-making body. This is to inform the body that's making the decision. So keep those folks who are not on the board out of the line of fire. So then you do public comment. You can close public comment after everybody's gone. And then I would encourage you to do more board discussion, because then you can discuss based on what you heard the public say. They can hear you incorporate their concerns, their thoughts, their comments into that discussion. And then you can go on and do final action. Now, it sounds like you all have the main motion set at the beginning of the topic. When the topic's on the floor, the main motion's presented, and you may do some amendments to the motion, and then the public can comment on those amended motions, which is totally fine. Like I said, we operate under Robert's Rules most common because it's the thing that we see used the most, so we are most familiar with it. And Robert's Rules allows, so they have the formal introduction of a motion or a topic, which is you have to be recognized by the chair, make the motion needs to be seconded. It is now on the floor, and it's the property of the body at large. That's a very formal way to do it. Robert's Rules allows small boards, which are boards under 12 members or less, to operate under what they call informal rules. Informal rules, amongst other things, could look like we'll bring up the topic, we'll have discussion, we'll hear all of the public comment, and then we'll make the motion, which means they're not doing a bunch of amendments. I don't know that that would work very well for you all, given the complexity and the breadth of the work that you do, but it is an option. Whatever you decide to do, I would have it written down in a procedure, and I would do it consistently every time. Because when the public comes back to that next meeting and you're giving your intro speech about how things are going to go, and they typically have, let's see, I think we have one. Policy on fair use. They typically have the motion first and then public comment after it's been amended, and that's how we always do things. And this time we're going to do public comment and then give the motion. It could feel jarring to them. It could feel like you've changed things up, and if they have low trust, they're going to assume you're doing it to be shady, even if you're not, right? So whatever you do, just do it consistently. Questions or thoughts on that before I continue? Okay. The next thing that I would call out is, you can see on this agenda, we have estimated times. Estimated time should always be in deference to public comment. So I would not suggest cutting public comment off after 20 minutes or 15 minutes under this policy on fair use and reservation criteria, just because we put an estimated 20 minutes on there. If the choice is your board policy about how much time it should take, or a constitutional right, the constitutional right's going to win out. Okay, if that decision has to be made. However, if you have an estimated time about how long each topic is going to take, that can be helpful, because then people know when they can expect, how long they can expect to be there before their topic comes up. But if it's wildly inaccurate, maybe it's best practice to not do it. It's just an option. The other thing, when I worked for a nonprofit healthcare system for a while, and when we would have executive team meetings, they would have on the agenda the estimated time. It was either 5, 10, or 15 minutes. They were very strict about it. And behind that estimated time, they had either an I, a D, or a C. And what that meant was inform, consult, or decide. Similar to how you have action items and non-action items, right? So those are decisions. But then those other two, the inform and consult, would be things like, hey, we just want you to know about this. So things that might come up in the director's report or commission correspondence. And consult is, we need to have a conversation about this, but we're not ready to make a decision yet. So there's lots of ways you can slice and dice this and put things on the agenda or not put them on the agenda. But the more that you can set expectations about what's going to happen and when, the less anxious people will be. Okay. And then we talked a little bit about voting with reason. I think with these contentious topics, if you can vote with reason, they can hear that you are weighing the options on both sides and ultimately have to make a decision. But that's back to that learning in public thing, right? You are taking what they're saying in real time and letting it influence your decision, because that's how the process is supposed to work. Questions or thoughts? Okay. How do you deal with, or when do you have a conversation as a body during the meeting about sharing things that you've heard come up in your region or things that constituents are concerned about? Do you have a place on the agenda where you can talk about that?
At the very top of the agenda, before we even start the meeting, it's like, I mean, the meeting has started, but it's at the very top where we do director reports. Yeah, and then it's followed by the commission reports and followed by the director report.
Perfect. Okay. And what happens if something comes out of that commission report and disclosure time that needs action?
There's no action unless it's on the agenda.
Okay, so it would go to the next meeting then, is that right?
Correct.
Wonderful. See, you all got this already. What about if the public brings something up in public comment for items not on the agenda? How far do you go with that conversation before you pause it until it's on the next agenda?
I just let them comment, and we don't do a back and forth with them.
Perfect.
It's just comments.
Love it. Okay. Let's take a look at, on the last page of your packet, there's a chart. It's a motions chart. Is there anywhere that you get stuck in your main motions, your amendments, your privileged motions, any of that kind of stuff that you want to talk about? And I say that as I'm going to give you time to unmute if you want. You have a duty as an appointed seat on this board to engage. And it can be really uncomfortable to engage if you don't know the rules of the game, right? Because there's all of these amendments and there's these partly pro words that I don't really understand. If you're not engaging because it's difficult to navigate that, you are doing a disservice to the people that you represent. So, and that's why I created the online course, so that people could practice and learn more about these common motions. But I want you to feel comfortable with the mechanics of it so that you can engage in the content confidently and represent the people that you represent to the fullest extent.
Well, I'll just say that when I was appointed, the governor's office sends you a link to a Robert's Rules of Order course. So I did that, but also during the meeting, we have a lot of help with doing motions correctly by the lawyers that are there. And we always have, so even if our motion is a little bit stated incorrectly, they'll help us get it correct.
Good. That's awesome. And that's huge, because whatever you say is what the motion is, not what you meant to say, right?
And
Right.
I try to make sure, sorry, Susan, I try to make sure too that the staff understands what we're asking or passing also, because that's super important that they understand how to implement it when we're done.
Yeah. And how are you, I assume it's in the director's report, but maybe there's other avenues. How are you checking in with the capacity of the staff when you're making decisions?
Are you talking before the meeting, informational? What are you asking?
Yeah, so in that top part where you have reports and kind of correspondence, how are you keeping tabs on what's happening that's being executed that you've already decided, and what the availability and capacity is to make changes that you're coming or you're looking at moving forward?
I'm not sure what you're asking, but we don't cover any of that. We cover, I guess, just updates on the regions, and it could be an update on what we've passed in the past. But everything is pretty informational stuff is covered by the individual staff person. They give a report before we action.
Yeah, Ashley, this is Jeff. This is actually one of the kind of fascinating differences between like my life experience with municipalities and school districts and whatnot before I got here, is that it is in many ways similar to, the relationship between, city commissioner, city council, and more akin to like a strong manager charter type structure where, you've got a department here and a commission there, but we really do have kind of two distinct sets of statutory authorities. And And so when we're as department, we're staffing the commission and doing that in a way to help them fulfill their specific statutory responsibilities. For example, the reg set process for hunting and fishing. There's just certain things only they can do, but there's not a lot of space for, and when you raise that question, it's kind of interesting because, that's the space you live in municipalities and to some extent school districts, where your elected governing body sort of can and does in many cases sort of push work back to the staff and say, here's we as the elected, city commission of Helena want to enact a non-discrimination ordinance. I mean, I lived through that as city attorney here.
Yep.
And then that generates a tremendous amount of staff lift
Yes.
to go back, build that up, bring it back to the elected officials, and then they work that up through their policy development and enactment process.
Sure.
There's just not as much sort of, I guess, free space, for lack of a better characterization, for the Fish and Wildlife Commission to kind of come up with things on their own, if you will. It's more of they have a set defined role under statute that these are the things you do, and then we staff to those statutory taskings. And so a long-winded way of saying I don't think see or feel sometimes the kind of staff overburden or staff disconnect between like a city commission that says we need you to go out here and you go do this and on a planning side and a planning and development shop going, oh my Lord, we can't do that, and then that having to be buffered with a city manager and that sort of thing. We're just kind of unique in that space that we certainly I think as staff would like to think we're all highly receptive and listening to the commission when they're pointing towards things they would like to see, and then try and as best we can configure downrange staff work to that direction. But it is a little different in that I don't think there's that sort of dynamic where the appointed commissioners are overloading staff or sending them off in different directions. We just have a little bit different box structure with the state agency and the state board here.
Awesome. I appreciate that. That clarity is super helpful. And fantastic, because then you can operate with less of the noise and be true to what you're doing statutorily. That's great. Okay. What other common things do I see show up? I think we've covered a lot of it. Okay, so back to, do we have questions about the mechanics of the meeting in any form? How to prep for it, how to navigate through it, what to do when it's done, how to interact with your constituents in an appropriate way, any of that stuff?
Ashley, do you have any recommendations for when we have, like for the contentious meeting in August, we did have a MHP officer uniformed in the back, and then we usually have 2 plainclothes wardens that we just spread out in the crowd just in case.
Yep.
We keep them in the back. If people look around the room, they're going to see him back there. But is that? I'm of this, just so you know my history, I'm a retired police officer and a military veteran. So my whole thing with, why we don't have more than that is because we don't want it to look like us versus them.
Yep.
We minimize it, but we also want it to be present. And so do you have any experience or recommendations for improving that, or does that sound like it's pretty adequate?
No, I think that's great practice. I think as soon as you put a deputy or highway patrol in the room, it sets a tone, right? And people will take that tone one of 2 ways. Either it's going to make them more agitated or it's going to bring them comfort. I think at the end of the day, you want to protect the process and you want to protect the people. You have lots of tools as a commission to de-escalate things when they get a little bit heated, but no discussion is ever worth a life. So pay attention to the temperature in the room, use recesses, use breaks, use all those things as tools to help kind of bring people down and be able to reset. But I do think it is appropriate to make sure that people feel and can operate safely. That comes back to that court decision. If people don't feel like they can safely engage as a member of the public, it violates their right to participate. I think that case came out at Costa Mesa, maybe. Anyway, there was somebody that made a gesture in the audience as a member of the public that made the rest of the public feel unsafe to share opposing viewpoints. And that was found to be significant enough that that original individual was not allowed to continue participating. So we want to make sure everybody feels like they're comfortable. Good questions. Anything else? All right. Well, that's, I think, all I've got. These meetings don't take nearly as long when they're online. It's harder for me to stare you down and ask questions.
Hey, I jumped on late. And we were catching up. Did we talk then about sort of how we've been approaching the amendments process with everybody? And because I know we had the kind of offline conversation during the bathroom break about that being, and I think you did mention you can go either way with that. But the big piece being that as long as, your commission or your city council or whatever the case is when it's clear that all you're doing through that motion and an amendment process is just setting up a motion in front of the commission, and then folks can provide comment on that motion as it's postured, the motion as before it was amended, amendments that weren't accepted, everything, because no final action has been taken at that point. That is their opportunity to come back, frankly, and say anywhere along that way that what you've arrived at isn't what I agree with. I think it should look this way. And there isn't, anything. In fact, the process is intended to contemplate that at the back end of that public comment period, if as decision makers, there's been comment provided that has changed your perspective on whether or not the main motion, which is just a procedural vehicle as it sits in front of you, does or doesn't reflect what you want to do as an appointed board member, commission member, then to reconfigure that, to vote against that motion and make an alternative motion to move again.
Yes, and I appreciate that highlighting clarification. You just reminded me of something. Don't forget that. So yes, I think and it sounds like you have a very competent chair that's all over this anyway. But making sure that the public recognizes the difference between final action and the tools to get to the question to consider for final action. Voting on an amendment to the main without public comment does not violate their right to participate because you have not made a final decision. And they can go back and say, that amendment that you made, I don't think you should have made it. That's a completely valid public comment at the end after you've made all of those amendments, because you still have the ability to go back and change them. And another note about motions, I like to see motions in the affirmative. It's great practice. Even if you disagree with the motion, you do not have to support a motion to make it or second it, right? You could be vehemently opposed to something and still make the motion or second the motion, because the act of making and seconding a motion is just to say, we need to talk about this. And then let's say you make a motion to approve something, somebody else seconds it, and then all 7 of you vote no. What you've done is said, we've considered it, we've made the decision, and it's put to rest. I do not like when people won't put the question out in front of the body because they personally disagree with it, because it doesn't allow for the opportunity to have the conversation. It's also not great practice to make a motion in the negative, meaning I move that we don't approve this. That gets very, very confusing very quickly. Because am I voting yes to say I don't approve it, or should I vote no to not want? Anyway, so I move to approve this thing, and then you can vote no on it. On the motion that you moved, you can then turn around and vote it down. But staying in the affirmative makes it easier for everybody to understand the question that's being asked of them.
Yeah, and when you put it that way, it reminds me, I have seen that on, frankly, a lot more than one occasion where a board member or commission member will openly say that, you know, that look, at as things sit right now, I'm actually not really supportive of how
Yeah.
what's being recommended here by staff or recommended, you know, typically it's city setting or a school district setting. But that being said, I'm going to go ahead and make the motion to set this up for the discussion, the public comment, and, you know, be very forthright about that on the front end. And that also lets the public know where people sit and lets the public know that they're certainly that they want to hear the public comment and get that process rolling. So that's a really good point, that making the motion and or second isn't in any way, shape, or form tying you to supporting the underlying motion if that's, you know, not where you are either at the beginning or by the end of the process.
Correct. Yep, exactly. And it's also important to recognize that just because you made or seconded the motion doesn't mean that you are responsible for the motion once it's on the floor. Once it's made and seconded, that motion is the property of the body, not of you as an individual commissioner. So you don't need to try to defend it or do any of that. You can engage with it just like you would any other motion. It's not yours to shepherd in any special way. The only exception to that statement is depending on which kind of parliamentary structure you follow. Sometimes the person who made the motion gets the privilege of being the first to speak on the motion. So whether you do that or not, I think is a local board or commission decision. But recognizing that it's a mechanics, it's a process to get the conversation in front of the body is separate from your evaluation of the merit of the topic.
So that being said, we do provide, when we provide the department's position on a proposal and information sheet, we also provide potential motion language. Do we need to tighten that language up? Or should I should say, should we present every one of those motions on the P&I sheet in a positive light rather than offering them the option to say, you can either use this motion language to support, this motion language to deny? Does that cloud the issue if we add potential motion language for both directions? Would it be better to just use one motion in the positive and let the body decide?
I think my initial reaction is I would use the same motion either way and have your staff recommendation on a separate line. So here's the motion to consider approving these reg changes. And staff recommendation is to not approve the changes.
Okay, yeah, and that's essentially what we do with issues like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. As long as you're giving kind of, because all you're doing, they are not tied to that language, right? That's just a suggestion to help them in the moment. And sounds like the attorneys can do the same thing and provide more real-time support. So I think if you give them something to work with and then give your recommendation and make it clear that they're two separate things, I think that's totally fine.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
I would agree this, Leslie. I mean, we use those more just for guidelines. We do not rubber stamp what they say. So, but it is helpful just so that the wording is proper and that all bases are covered. So I think we're good on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I do
Great.
think we just try and structure those to be really more intended to be helpful to the commission, to give them a sense of really just the general language of what the motion should look like. And then to the extent, you know, they want to adapt or amend that on during the course of the meeting, we're just there to help make sure that happens. And you're right, we try to, and we're not always great at it, but to try and you know, not put the not sort of things in there as motions, because a lot of times, you know, you don't need, it kind of used to drive me nuts as a school board member. You need a motion to not do something. If you
Right.
just don't do anything, you've not done something. You know,
Yep.
there's not you don't need to double affirmative that. If the commission doesn't act on something, it has not been done. They don't need to move to not act and second
Right.
that and vote to not act. So you kind of have to be careful about, you know, not over layering all that in a confusing manner.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that prompted another thought for me. Do you all use things like postpone to a date certain or postpone indefinitely?
That's
Not very frequently.
Okay.
but not, it's not a normal practice. At least it hasn't been as long as I've been here.
Okay, great. I am not a fan of using postpone indefinitely as a motion, as a tool to not consider something. Either do it and shut it down and resolve it, or don't start the consideration process at all. But I don't like using it as a way to kick the can down the road. The other thing to note, under Robert's rules, if a decision is made, it can be reconsidered by, so it can be brought up again for consideration, even though the decision has already been made at a future meeting by somebody who was on the prevailing side of the vote. So what that does is protects you from having a minority of the commission try to push something through that nobody else is interested just by sheer repetition, right? But if there is information that comes to light that says we really do need to reconsider what we decided, if you were on the prevailing side of the vote, you have standing under Robert's rules to bring that conversation back to the table for reconsideration.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, and maybe Chair Robinson can correct me on this, but I don't think we've run into that circumstance, at least not since I've been here.
Not since
But I
I'm
think,
there either. I have not seen that.
okay,
Except
I
for
think,
there's been instances where we have moved something, I guess, to the next meeting, but it usually is before we start the meeting, it's taken off the agenda
okay.
and moved to the
Okay.
next meeting.
Yeah,
And I think there are times where that's totally appropriate. You need more information, or you had late public comment, or something came up, as long as it's going to be addressed in the short term and not just being used as a tool to ignore or not address a problem.
and this commission has been good about being very decisive. So
Okay.
they're kicking the can down the road unless there's a lack of information or a potential for information that could change their mind.
Beautiful. I love it. And I think that the nature of the work that you all do and the level of public comment and involvement and kind of deliberation before you get to final action is such that you probably won't have situations come up very often where any of these are a real issue. More just an awareness thing. Real quick, so you have call the main motion. You can make an amendment to a main motion. You can make an amendment to the main motion, which gets very confusing very quickly. In that online course, the two other things that I talked about, I'll just tell you what they are since I mentioned them. There's call the question, which is a time when the commission can basically cut off debate and say, we are going to vote on this question right now. No more talking about it. We're going to do it. That requires a 2/3 vote because you are limiting the privileges and rights of the people on the board with their discussion. So if you have a main motion on the floor and somebody calls the question, that's now a new motion, privilege motion on the floor, and you have to vote on that. If you get a 2/3 vote on that in the affirmative, then you go back to the main motion. No more discussion. You're taking the vote right now.
So
Because-
past
go ahead.
training that I have taken, though, you can ask if there's any more discussion, if there's any opposition, I guess, to stopping discussion rather than doing the 2/3 vote. And if there's no one that's in opposition, then go ahead to the vote.
Yeah, I mean, if you're operating under a structure that's not strictly Robert's rules, then yeah, go for it. If that works for you, then I am 100% in agreement. Just be mindful, and I'm sure you already are, that if you are going to call the question or stop discussion, you still have that public comment period before you take action. Okay, so that's call the question, and then the last one was divide the question. So if you have a motion on the floor that is complex and there's two or more kind of major themes in that question, you could call or make a motion to divide the question and make them two separate motions or more, and then you can consider them as individual pieces. So if there's something in that main motion that is a major blocker that's going to make it so it's untenable for people and they can't support it, you could pull that out by dividing the question and make it a separate decision that would then potentially protect these other things that were in that original motion. So it's a tool that you can use. You don't have to, but that's available if you need to bifurcate a conversation. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a quick question. So last August meeting, I mean, I kind of hit the ground running. I threw a healthy number of amendments out on the wolf topic. It happened to be that I had an amendment and Commissioner Burrows had kind of a competing amendment for the same space on quotas and whatnot. I guess just general discussion. I think on the floor I ended up pulling my amendment and we went forward with Burrows. But I guess in just I don't know if you have any opinions on, you know, in the event that happens again and you have competing amendments for the same space, can two competing amendments kind of live together? I mean, it's kind of tough for the public to interpret that they're commenting on two possible outcomes. You know, it's like a pick your own ending book or something, but I don't know if you have any comment on that.
I just want to jump in real quick, this Leslie. With from the beginning, I have asked, I have them dated in the order that they come in. So that's how I decide. So I'm not choosing whose gets to be discussed first. And so I do that based on when they came in. So if one passes, then there could be one that's like opposition or whatever to what we just passed. So just to give you a little bit of a background on how we do it.
Okay, I appreciate that, Commissioner Robinson. And so let's say you have 5 amendments. When you get to the amendment portion, do you give a title to each of the amendments before you start, or do you just jump in number 1, run it all the way through, and then go to number 2?
Oh, we did try to like put them together in areas or whatever and discuss them in batches, I guess is what we're calling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Haven't had to do it, I guess, in the past, but there were so many that we had to batch them so that they were like motions being discussed at the same time.
Sure. Okay.
And Ashley, this is Kevin real quick. Kevin, legal counsel for the department. Just jumping in and saying that, well, one of the recommendations there too is, or how Chair Robinson handled it too, is not just saying Amendment 1, but having the commissioner introduce the substance of the amendment so the public was aware of which one was discussed. So.
Okay.
One more thing too, I have asked Eric to have it on the screen too. So in the meeting and online, they have the language up on a screen to follow. So it's helpful for us and the public to be able to follow what we're talking about.
Oh, I think that's great. Yeah. Okay. So then, Commissioner Wargo, then what was your experience in your first go around with, because wolves are an easy topic to start with, right? Just running with it. What was your experience with those potential competing amendments? Did it make it more difficult to engage with that first amendment if you were waiting for your amendment, or did it feel like yours was then redundant? Like, what happened?
It was more from a redundant, you know, we came at I mean, so the department had a recommendation of a statewide 500 wolf quota. Commissioner Burrows reduced that to, I think originally it was like 458, you know, backed off and had a really good justification. I took an amendment a step further. I said 450 wolves statewide plus a region 3 sub quota, but then I was kind of stepping into Commissioner Brooks territory in region 3. And anyway, I mean, we came at things similar enough. It was like, well, we can have this discussion if I just pull my amendment or whatnot. But in the event that, you know, it was like, no, I'm going to be pigheaded on this, and we have like, you know, 2 competing amendments on the same topic. Do we need to reduce that down to kind of a single item for the public or?
So your chair may disagree with me, and I will always defer to her. My initial thought is you have a right as part of your role and a duty to bring your ideas and concerns forward, just as everybody else does. I like that the dated thing so that there's no preference based on some other factor. But I think it would make sense, like in this case, to have the First Amendment run through and have that person introduce, explain what was going on, have the decision made on the amendment. And then when it gets to you, since you were able to introduce it, what you can say is the intent of my amendment was X, which was or was not covered in that previous amendment. So if it was covered, I'm gonna make a motion to remove this amendment from the agenda. Or if it's not, say I would appreciate my colleagues' consideration of this amendment to address this other kind of thing that we still haven't talked about with that conversation in the first one.
So
Is
I don't disagree with what you said, and we have had competing amendments go out to public comment.
Mhm.
And then actually they wouldn't have went out to a public comment. They were made motions, and then how I bring up to a vote though is based on when they came in, because I just have to have something that makes it so I'm not picking and choosing who gets to go first. So we can have competing amendments, but they're going to be voted on in the order that they came in.
Mhm. So in this case, you had 500 unit quota, or animal quota. Then the First Amendment was 458. So you make that decision. So let's say they adopt that amendment. So now the motion reads 458 animals. And then your motion comes in with 450 plus these sub quotas. I think you can still have that full conversation in light of the amended emotion and consider something that's a little bit different. So
Actually,
I think it's
Kevin, a little nuance on that. So what we did in the August meeting was you had an amendment come in from, say, Commissioner Wargo, and that amendment was made and then seconded for discussion purposes,
Mhm.
right? And then there was discussion on that, and then like Chair Robinson was saying that they were sort of batched together. So the competing amendment, the situation that came from Commissioner Burrows, he then brought that up, and then that was seconded for discussion purposes. Nothing was voted on
Oh.
until the public because there was no public comment by that point. So
Mhm.
instead of handling each amendment, because I think there are 10 total that were already available for the public to see
Mhm.
for the month in the meeting, instead of a discrete process for each amendment and then the
Mhm.
amendment being adopted as part of the parent motion,
Mhm.
the amendment was offered, seconded, if it was, I think every single one of them was seconded, discussed, and then either withdrawn or went forward. And I think if I'm recalling
Okay.
Commissioner Wargo correctly, you withdrew, or there was withdrawal of one of the amendments on the count of the overall statewide quota, if I'm recalling that correctly.
Yeah, I don't think, if I remember right, I don't know
Specifically
that there
yours
was
and
a
Burroughs.
second. I don't
Yeah.
know that there was a second on my amendment. I think I withdrew that before
Okay.
a second, just because it was, it was recognized that it was competing. I guess I could be wrong in that, but
I thought yours got seconded for the purpose of being able to be discussed by the body
maybe it did.
before it was withdrawn, I think is what occurred.
Okay. So it is, and I appreciate that clarification. It is not common practice to have two amendments to the main on the floor at the same time.
Yep.
What I would suggest you consider, and this may or may not make sense for you, but whatever that the First Amendment is by timestamp, is the amendment to the main. Could you create the structure so that the Second Amendment is an amendment to the amendment? So that you have
Yes.
the comparison between those two, and then amendment to the main once that's decided.
I think we could do that. I think the complexity here, and Chair Robinson, I'll let you speak to this if you want to, right? The complexity here was because we had so many substantive amendments to the parent as put forth by the department. that there was concern that we were going to sort of lose control of being able to, if we went out, if they're handled discreetly and went out to the public 9 times or 8 times,
Yeah.
we would,
Yeah.
it would get confusing for the public. They may be commenting on aspects, and then the chair would have to step in and say, we're actually only talking about this amendment, but of course the amendment is to the parent, which is substantive to the agenda topic at large. So how would you filter? How would it would create a pretty big burden on the chair to have to come in and filter comment by comment?
Yeah.
Because of the nexus between the parent and the discrete amendment. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a fair question. I think the best I can offer is if you have the visual aid to be able to highlight which thing or things you're focused on right now. And so let's say the second amendment is we're considering it an amendment to the amendment. Then visually you can move from this was the main, this was the amendment, the original amendment. Now we're focused on this one. So you can give people a visual cue to stay focused. That is really hard to do in real time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the visual aids has been helpful. We've had situations of friendly amendments that have come in that have been able to tweak things, and and as we work through it, I think the August meeting in the Wolves and the upcoming season saying that's why this training is very timely are the two that create very technical possibilities of very technical voluminous amendment situations. And so it's good for I think the body to have this dialogue here, and frankly for me as I'm sitting there to hear best practices. So I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's always in real time, it gets messy, right? It's the best laid plan, and then you do it and you get sidetracked. Oh, I'm not the only one that lives next to a train. So I don't know that I gave you a clear answer, but I am happy to, if it's ever helpful, to look at an agenda before it goes out and kind of workshop what those amendments might look like, or after it goes out, right before your meeting. How do we navigate this? I'm always happy to be a resource for that. And I think it's a case by case thing. There's no hard and fast rules. So you luckily have an experienced chair that can navigate that. But yeah, you want to make sure that in the future you're being consistent. So when you all turn over and you have a brand new group of people, they are, to the best of your ability, operating with clarity about how things were done in the past and why.
Yeah, and so maybe going back to Commissioner Wargo, your question, I mean, is it to Ashley's point, is it helpful to think about in the scenario where there are 2 amendments that have been posted that get to the same issue? Let's just take the statewide quota, for example, and there's 2 different numbers. I mean, is it, and actually I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is the cleanest practice in that circumstance, what you're saying is all right, we're going to lead with whatever, like Chair was saying, whatever was posted first or what came in first, that amendment's offered, and then instead of offering a separate amendment, Commissioner Wargo, like you did, you could offer an amendment to Commissioner Burrow's amendment, which would either be seconded or not. But the nuance there, and help me here, Ashley, the nuance there in the amendment to amendment structure is there would have to be a vote on that amendment to the amendment at that point before public comment. Okay.
Yep.
It's a little strange too, right? So
it's all funky, and doing this in the public just makes in the public process makes it so much harder. But I think if we think about the amendments to the main as the tools to get to the final question and be very clear with the public, you will get an opportunity to comment on this. We need to figure out what the question is first. So the main motion is not the question we're trying to keep in defiance of all of these amendments, right? This is just our first draft. And we got to run through all of these amendments to figure out what our actual question is. When we figure out what the question is, then we want your comment on it because we know what we're considering.
Right.
I think if you can frame it like that, then there's less resistance to moving through those amendment motions without public comment.
Right. Commissioner Wargo, did that Ashley and I's back and forth there get at what you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's just a lot of, potential off kind of sidetrack hypotheticals or whatnot.
Yep.
Like I don't know. I guess thinking back on that, if I had amended Burroughs' amendment to incorporate what I had, then so how many is it fair to say that you can have a main motion, or you can have a main motion, an amendment to an amendment, and then that is kind of it
Yes, I
until
think actually, you can't. Well, actually, you speak to that.
That's as far as I would go. It's gonna get real messy if you go any farther than that.
gotcha. Because in this scenario, I mean, I ended up pulling mine, and then Commissioner Brooke amended the amendment to kind of get at what I was. But if I had jumped in and put it, I was talking about an 80 wolf sub quota for Region 3. If I had made that amendment to the amendment, and then Commissioner Brooke didn't like that number, I guess it would have got, I don't know, kind of maybe pigeonholed into a different discussion.
Okay, but we did that because when my amendment was amended by the chair's recommendation, and then so we amended that number anyway. So within the amendment, my
Oh,
amendment, it was amended on the fly. So I think the beauty of what happened, whether it was right or wrong, is the public got to see we didn't come in there with a number, that it was a process that we went through of discussion between the commissioners.
Yep.
With a
Yep.
lot of information from everybody's vantage point. I don't think there was no commissioner that did not weigh in.
And that's that learning in public that is so important.
and I guess maybe I just throw out there the reason for stating that. I think the meeting, all things considered, and how much stuff I threw out there, I think the meeting went really well. I'm just, question being like, was there a better way to handle things? Not that necessarily, like, I think it, all things considered, went pretty smooth. So.
And I'm there with you, Commissioner Margo. That's why I'm curious, get Ashley's thoughts on that process, because they are unique. They're unique meetings that happen, once or twice a year, once or twice every other year. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think these are great discussions to have before you get in there. So this is Unit 5 of that online course. This is a city council, I think. I don't remember what we were. Oh, this is a pool. Okay. So talking about amendments. So this is when I'm thinking about mains and amendments, this is how I think about them. So in this case, city wants to charge out-of-town residents $8.50 per person per visit to use a municipal pool. Somebody's going to propose an amendment to change that to $8.50 per person per visit to $4.50 per person per visit. And then somebody's going to move to amend that amendment to replace the word per visit with per day. Okay, so it looks like this. So that's that initial main motion, and then the amendment to the main, and then the amendment to the amendment is made while this one's on the floor. So now when you're out here on that amendment to the amendment, you're only talking about, and a great way to do this is to say, I move to amend the amendment on the floor by striking the number 458 and replacing it with 450 plus a subquota. It's very clear what part of the motion you're focused on. And then if you wanted to, you could highlight in real time, if you had the technical capacity with your meetings, to say, this is what we're focused on right now. Is it 850 or 450? And then right now we're focusing on, is it per person per visit, or is it per day? And help people track through what section of this sentence or paragraph are we focused on. And once the motion's on the floor, if you're following true Robert's rules, once the motion's on the floor, in this case, the amendment to the amendment, you need to address that motion first before you go back to the amendment to the main. Because in principle, you should only have one motion for consideration in front of the body at any given time. They can be privileged, they can leapfrog, they can do things like this, but you only have one question on the floor at a time. And then once you make a decision about that amendment to the amendment, then you jump back to your amendment to the main, and then your main motion. So in this case, they approved the amendment to the amendment. They moved it to per day instead of per visit. And then they approved the amendment to the main, which changed it to $450 per person instead of $850. And now you're back to the original main motion. This is the one, now that we've workshopped it, we know what the question is, because it's no longer about $850, it's no longer about per visit. We're talking about $450 per person per day. Public, what are your thoughts? And they could come back in and say, I think that you shouldn't have adopted the amendment that changed it from $850 to $450. The people out of town need to pay their fair share. Perfectly valid public comment, but we know what the question is that we're responding to.
Maybe follow-up question on that venue. So, okay, so you make an amendment, you're talking about the pool facility.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of in our scenario, it would be, well, it's a rec center. So there's not only a pool, there's also a weight room, and there's there's a $5 a day charge for weight room. Can you have, I think that's kind of more how our meeting played out, where there was amendment for the pool. And we also were talking about the fee for a weight room, and then those go out to the public together, but exclusive. Is that because, I mean, to the point of like, there's so many, if each individual subpart was brought open into its own public discussion, the meeting could spiral into a multi-day.
Right. I like giving the public comment period the space for each individual consideration. And then during the meeting, you follow this where you're just focused on those itty bitty pieces. And once you have the question, then go to public comment. Does that make sense? So in the beginning, they get to consider all of it individually, and they can consider the final production, whatever it is. But in between, that's where you workshop.
So you're saying each subcomponent would go out to its own public comment? Or there would
If
be one
if it's going to be on the agenda as a proposed amendment, I would continue giving the access to that specific topic that you have been. Does that make sense? So you had both competing motions, if I understand right, both competing amendments go out for the public comment period before, is that right?
Well, not necessarily competing amendments. They were,
or similar, your batch amendments.
Yeah, we went through, deliberated, and then went through with a cluster of, I don't know. I mean, there was like 8 or 9 amendments that went out for initial public comment.
Okay. And that's in that 30-day period.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the critical thing, is that we have made the last 5 years the shift to, like, 5 years ago we didn't post any amendments before the meeting. The commissioners wanted to make them, they could, but the department has now posted amendments for public comment ahead of the meeting.
But not all amendments.
Not all.
Yes.
Commissioner Brooke made an amendment that wasn't posted. So I mean, I'm not. We in the interest of trying to allow the public to see if commissioners have, discrete advocacies, they can see those beforehand. If the commissioners want to offer that opportunity. So.
Commissioner Wargo, I feel like I still haven't got to the crux of your question.
I don't know. It's complex. I don't know. I think the way that we went about things was good. I was just kind of
okay. Are you more concerned about them being discrete and maybe similar but slightly different ahead of the meeting for public comment, or are you more concerned about how you navigate those similar things in the middle of the meeting?
More so in the middle of the meeting,
okay.
And how many times they go out for public. I mean, like, basically. Yeah, I mean, to Kevin's point, everything was posted and there was comments received. So it wasn't like there was a discrete comment period. We take that into consideration. We boil it down into, individual amendments. We take public comment, and, some of those amendments went through, some of them died prior to making a main motion, and then or, I guess an amended main motion, and then we went out for one, final public comment on the kind of complete package at the end.
Yep.
Some of this is me just talking through the process and just kind of it's not overly intuitive.
No, and I appreciate that you're willing to kind of think through this in real time, because these are the questions that will stop new commissioners from engaging because they're not sure what the lay of the land is. So figuring it out ahead of time makes it so much easier to jump in when you're live and on. I will just say, in my personal opinion, based on what I've seen and based on how we read that constitutional right to participate prior to final action, it seems appropriate and consistent with statute to provide all of the known amendments ahead of time at your discretion, to make different amendments or additional amendments in the moment as things come up because you're learning in real time, to workshop that language and do amendment after amendment with just the discussion of the commission, and then put the final result out for the public to comment on at the meeting. I think that still honors the intent of the public's ability to participate prior to final action because you haven't taken a vote, but it gives you clarity about what the question on the floor is, without having to get lost in public comment that may or may not be exactly on point about the amendment that you're focused on at that particular moment.
Mhm.
Kevin, do you have anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, no, just one more thought, and I can, it's a point of discussion that I've had, with the chair on how to handle something, a topic where you have amendments that the public has already seen, that they have, passionate interest in one way or the other. That amendment then comes to the meeting, they come to the meeting and they say it doesn't get seconded, or it gets seconded and voted on before their public comment opportunity. That gives me a little anxiety, not necessarily as a violation of the right to participate strictly, but for the commission optically. Like, I guess is my, if I drove 100 miles and I showed up and I wanted to speak to whatever that amendment was that I really cared about either way, and I didn't get the chance to do that, and there was a vote before time, because it was all I got back was the motion as amended or not. And I hear you, I completely agree, and I've said this to, I think, most of the commissioners, about there is no final, I think I said at the meeting, there is no final action. So the right to participate hasn't been violated, because they can tell you as a body, you should go back and you didn't incorporate that amendment, and here's why you should, and the commission can do that. But so in the Wolf meeting, we took the tact, given the volume of amendments that came in before time, to have two separate public comment opportunities. One with the parent motion and all the amendments that had been seconded and discussed, and then went back to the commission. They either rejected or incorporated those amendments, and that was the final question, I guess, as you're framing it. And that got a separate a shorter but a separate public comment opportunity, so people could see what it actually was, because we had so many that were out there beforehand. I thought, and sort of made the recommendation to the commissioners, to the chair, to the commission's council, that would make things the clearest possible for those individual members of the public, so they felt like, yeah, I showed up and I got to speak to that amendment that I cared about. So
I think that, go ahead.
I was assured by legal that is not every time, because we can still do it if we have just simple amendments, or
totally.
It was done because we had so many amendments. That's how we went out to comment before the main comment. But that was outside of our normal process, just because of the circumstances.
Sure. I think that was an astute move. I think that you went above and beyond your standard practice, but you probably saved yourself a lot of headache in the meeting of people not feeling like they can express themselves clearly, and probably saved a lot of negative interactions with the public after the meeting. It takes more time to do it twice like that, but I think it's time well invested because people feel like they're heard and they're a material part of the process. If they feel like it's just performative or perfunctory, they will push back, and it's going to make your job a lot harder. So while it may not make sense every time, I absolutely agree that that was probably the appropriate move for that type of meeting.
I did assure the chair that won't be my recommendation every time. So
Okay. All right. Anything else that's come up that you want to talk about?
I guess on the number of amendments that I threw out, you know, I chunked them up into pretty small, like kind of bite-sized pieces. That's why there was such a number. I mean, it was just the regulation package. I mean, I could have had one amendment that had, you know, multiple comments. I mean, I don't know. It seems bifurcating thing, you know, kind of letting each subject area kind of stand on its own merits. I mean, it seems like a better approach, but I mean, I could have also had one amendment that was, you know, touching to, you know, multiple different things. I don't know if you have input on that. I mean, it gets confusing with the number of amendments, but you're kind of stepping, you know, because some subparts passed, some subparts failed.
Yep.
Whatever. I mean, it seems it's better to leave things distinct, but I don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, in my completely uninformed opinion about the context of it, I like to see a motion and specifically an amendment to an emotion to be as discrete as possible. So the fewer combinations of themes or topics that you can include in there, the better. Because you could end up in a situation where either something gets voted down because it's too complex, or there's a rider in there that's untenable to other people. Or they could get to the point where they divide the question anyway, because these are two totally separate things. So it's good practice in parliamentary procedure to keep the motion or the amendment to a single topic as much as you can.
Okay,
It's
appreciate that.
a lot more clear to the public and to the commission if it's not all lumped together. It's very hard to follow if it's a bunch of things stuffed together.
And there was no way to make it not complicated. It was 6 1/2 right? I think the way that you chose is the more clear of the two not great options.
Yeah, in hindsight, I think it went as well as it could have. I was just a pain in the ass with 6 amendments.
I would rather see you have a plethora of amendments than not engage at all.
Does the chair share that same sentiment?
No comment.
I will say from my seat, just watching now these years of commission meetings or participating in them, that I've noticed a precipitous drop in the kind of criticism that the commission gets for being performative, as Ashley was saying. Not, you know, I've seen bodies in, you know, 67 years ago that just didn't. It was the commission operated as a rubber stamp to the department in 6, 7, 8 years ago, and that shift has created, I think, a better dialogue with the public. So for what it's worth.
No, I think that's helpful perspective. Means you guys are doing something right. All right. Anything else? Well, I am always happy to talk all things governance. So if something comes up, feel free to let Eric know. I've been in communication with him and happy to continue to do so. Otherwise, I think you all are doing great things already and will continue to do things that serve the best interest of the people of the state. So thank you so much for what you do.
Yeah, appreciate it. Real quick, the flow chart, kind of the mock-up scenario presentation, is that something that you did send to Eric, or?
Let me look here. This one? This one?
Yeah.
I did not. I can. It's It's unit 5 of that online course. I will send the link to the course
Oh,
landing page and
okay,
this
all right.
this here as a attachment so you guys can have access to both.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, if you'll send that link, I'll get it out to all the commissioners, especially the ones that were not able to attend today, because I think going through that course would be beneficial and it's not going to take very long.
Fantastic. Yep, I can absolutely do that. And there's these printable notes that go with each section, so you're welcome to print these off and have them as cheat sheets when you're at the meetings. Kind of keep track of where you're at. So happy to do that.
We prefer to refer to them as reference materials rather than using the word.
Heard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Yep, appreciate it.
All right, thanks again, Ashley. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now.
Sounds great.